Release that witch eye by Ermu. Chapter 801, Endless City. Is this really okay? Through the commanding post's window, Echo saw those Sand Nation civilians being whipped and tumbling on the ground. She could not help but feel sorry for them. They never knew what discipline was. They lived by the rule that the weak are prey to the strong. If we're to put these people into use sooner, other than sending them to war, this is the only way. Iron Axe replied in respect. You hadn't been in the southernmost region for long, and during that period, the chief was very concerned about you, so you might not be familiar with the small clan's natures. Such a kind of discipline isn't severe. One can even say it's necessary, otherwise they would consider Osha a clan with no authority, weak and easy to bully. At this, he showed a rare hint of hesitation. I think the reason that you're not used to it is probably that His Majesty is sometimes too benevolent. Completely agreed. Andrea, resting her upper body on the windowsill, shrugged. There is a saying among the nobles: carrots combined with sticks make the best way of ruling the subjects. The bigger the carrots are, the more benevolent the lord will be. What are carrots? Hummingbird asked in curiosity. They're kind of food, similar to His Majesty's corn, a sort of specialty of the Kingdom of Dawn, Andrea explained. But no matter how big the carrots are, they should always be much smaller than the sticks, which indicates that punishment should be more severe than awards so that the subjects would appreciate the favor. A lord such as Roland would be considered a black sheep in the city of Glow. Rare as it is, truthfully, I agree with you, Ashes said while pouting. His Majesty is especially eloquent? With her chin resting on her hands, Hummingbird thought for a while and said, the words he taught Thuram to speak sound very reasonable. The collective power is definitely stronger than an individual's power. But Thuram merely repeated what Roland told him to say. Iron Axe shook his head, smiling. Without seeing Neverwinter personally, one can never imagine what an inconceivable new order His Majesty has established. I believe that one day in the future, Grey Castle will become another Neverwinter, but that day is definitely not today. To make them remember the rules in the Sauterne territory, whips are more powerful than words. Echo slightly sighed without saying a word. Commander-in-Chief. A soldier suddenly walked into the commanding post and said, there is a riot breaking out in the Falling Stone clan and the Spring clan. Some people are confronting the defending army. For boarding the ship? Iron Axe asked solemnly. Yes. Those who were squeezed into the water called for their families. They asked for the same amount of food and reward. They argued that it's not that they didn't want to go to the Blackwater Valley, but that the OSHA had turned them down. All right. Who is guarding the camp? The 2nd Battalion of Flintlock. Call up 2 squads and those young OSHA lads who wanted to join the 1st Army. Tell them to gather at the riot spot. I'll be there right away. Yes, sir. Seeing that Iron Axe was about to leave, Echo could not help but call him and said, please don't be too harsh on them. Iron Axe stood in the doorway quietly for a moment, bowed to her and then said, I understand, Miss Silvermoon. I'll do it in moderation. After Iron Axe left, Echo returned to the desk, feeling melancholy. The process of the Sand Nation's relocation at the north did not go as smoothly as she expected. Although they could lead a well-off life as long as they follow His Majesty's instructions, some people still took the message that Roland asked her to deliver as a lie. Even those who had gained a piece of fertile land did not completely trust her nor His Majesty. Now she was sort of missing her life in Neverwinter. Compared with leading the strongest clan, she preferred the time when she stood on the top of the castle, overlooked the mountains and the city, and sung the songs composed by His Majesty. When the melody that she had never heard of sounded, she could feel genuine freedom and happiness. She had not sung for a long time since coming here. She wondered whether Roland had written any new songs. When can I sing out aloud again? Oh. Simbadi felt as though everything in his stomach was overturned. Along with the rise and fall of the concrete boat, some gastric acid welled up from his stomach again. Regardless of the vomit along the side of the boat from other people, he directly bent over the handrail and began to throw up. Hi, are you okay? Molly patted him on his back. His face was slightly pale. The concrete boat, steady as the ground while in the bay, became a swaying leaf when upon the sea. Bobbing in waves, it nearly hit the offshore beach several times. The horizontal waving never stopped. It was a total torture for the Sand Nation civilians that were experiencing the sea for the first time. Ahem. Almost fine. After throwing up, he laid on the deck lifelessly. Do you know how long we've been on the sea? Today is the 5th day. This isn't right, somebody gasped and said in a low voice. Do you remember what the Clear Spring clan said? They live in the oasis by the sea. We passed the Iron Sand City at first dusk, which means the concrete boat travels really fast. Yet why haven't we arrived at the Blackwater Valley? You mean, Molly asked. The destination of OSHA isn't the Blackwater Valley. Thuram lied. The place he's taking us is further south than the Choke Swamp. Further south? Molly started to worry. But there is nothing there. Could they be lost? The boat has been traveling along the coastline, which means it is highly unlikely for them to get lost. Somebody pressed at his forehead. If we're going somewhere closer to the south point than the Choke Swamp, it'll only be. Everybody, cheer up. Before somebody finished talking, Thuram suddenly appeared on the center of the deck and his words interrupted somebody's. I've some good news. We're arriving at our destination. Pack your luggage, line up, and prepare to disembark. Remember, be careful not to fall into the sea anymore, because no one will rescue you this time. Somebody propped up his upper body and peered beyond the shore. On shore it was still barren, no oasis to be seen. His speculation was confirmed by the rolling water vapor and gusted smoke columns on the sea in distance. There was only one place that could give such an inconceivable view. The endless cape. The exile place of the Mahjans. More and more Sand Nation civilians noticed the anomaly and became quite on edge on the deck. This is not the Blackwater Valley. You lied to us. Why did you bring us to the endless cape? Do you want to abandon us here? I want to go back. Please, let us leave. Shut up. At this moment, Thuram felt there was no need to conceal anything anymore. Have I said that we were going to the middle area of the Blackwater Valley? The valley tributaries run through the entire southern region, of course it includes the Cape area. Any underground Styx's River is extended from the valley, am I right? This is sophistry. Somebody thought angrily. If they had been told to work in the exile place, he was afraid that not many would apply for it. Nobody is going to be abandoned here. People from OSHA and Greycastle will join you in developing this area. Thuram raised his arm and spoke loudly, listen carefully. From now on, Endless Cape is no longer an exile area. It'll be a newly born town. This is the order from the chief. Chapter 802, Iron Whip Discipline. To build a new city, in this place? Somebody found it hard to believe his own ears. The silver stream got slimmer as it went south, finally it was entirely devoured by sand until it reached the Blackwater Valley. Hence came the name, the Land of Exile. Without water and an oasis, how could they survive in the vast desert? All the Sand Nation civilians on board were shocked by Thuram's speech, several of them stated their doubts like the one that somebody had. We can create water by ourselves. Thuram spoke loudly. But before that, the Vanguard troop has found a usable water source. You'll see it when you get off the boat. This aroused even more severe discussion. Create, some people shouted. How do we do that? Silverstream is a gift from Mother Earth. How could we create it? By the name of 3 gods, only deities' emissaries could turn the desert into an oasis. If we can't succeed, can we return the Southern Territory? Right, you won't leave us here and go back alone, will you? Confronted by these questions, Thuram hesitated for the first time. Somebody noticed that Thuram peeked at the Greycastle civilians before he thundered, the chief is capable of anything. As he said we can definitely create water. What you need to do however, is to follow instructions. Besides, Lady Silvermoon has promised, if we can't succeed, you'll be sent back to the port of Clearwater in advance and paid with 3 months' salary. At this, he patted at the whip upon his waist. Of course, I won't return without you. If anyone loafs on the job, be prepared to taste my iron whip. That explains it. Somebody realized that the leader of the team was not Thurum, but those poker-faced people from Grey Castle who were standing behind Thurum. During the holy duel, he had heard of the mightiness of these people more than once. Different from the Queen of Clearwater, they did not appear short of strength even when confronted by the warriors of big clans. But at this endless cape, even though they could defeat the watchdogs overnight, they still meant nothing in front of this endless sea of sand. Both the Northerners and the chief might have far underestimated the power of the desert. Unfortunately, for them, there were not many options left. About an hour later, the concrete boat slowly pulled into shore. Dragging his sore and exhausted body, Simbadi slowly walked off the boat. The moment when his feet touched the soft beach, he felt a long-lost relaxation. Finally, his world stopped shaking. Look, what's that? Molly pointed somewhere remote on the inland. A watchtower. Simbadi looked in the direction that Molly was pointing at and saw a black iron tower standing in the sand not far from the beach. At the top of the tower were 2 flags, one of which was scarlet, the other was with a complex embroidery pattern. Ordinarily, Simbadi would wonder why the girl who he only had an occasional conversation with would stay with him all the time, but now he was too weak to consider things in this aspect. Has someone arrived ahead of us? Let's go and take a look. Later. He shook his head. We'd better wait for Sir Thurum's instructions. Those Sand Nation civilians who had fallen into the water previously left a vivid memory in Simbadi's mind. He did not wish for the girl that he had a crush on to be whipped in front of everybody. Molly, finally I've found you. Molly's clansman gradually came to her. Simbadi, what a surprise to see you here. I thought you had passed out on the boat from seasickness. Haha, the crowd smirked. Simbadi lowered his head in embarrassment. Indeed, he was the weakest among his clansmen, be it in strength or guts. Usually, he would not mind being ridiculed, but today, in Molly's presence, he felt especially shameful. In fact, his performance in this voyage was even poorer than Molly's. Look, there is an iron tower. How did people transport something so heavy to this place? Probably by boat? I heard there is a direct shipping lane from Grey Castle to the Endless Cape. Will we camp there tonight? I guess so. Endless Cape is way more dangerous than an oasis. It must be guarded at night. There were only just over 20 men were from the Fishbone clan, which made them a fairly small group, but they were all of the young and strong members of the clan. One of them was called Carlone. Carlone was a strong performer among his peers. He was tall, handsome and skillful, which won him the favor of his clan chief. The moment he opened his mouth, he drew everybody's attention. I once escorted the exiled for Iron Sand City. According to my observation, the sizes of sandworms and scorpions in this area are much larger than those in an oasis. There's even a rumor that a giant scorpion with armor that dominates Earth also moves around here. We must stay alert at all times and set our tents as close to those from Grey Castle as possible. Do you think Sir Thurum is telling the truth? Can the chief really create an oasis out of this desert? Somebody asked. Most unlikely, Carlone smacked his lips and said. If he were really capable of that, he could have been the ruler of the desert without going through the holy duel. Why bother developing this area then? What should we do next? The crowd began to stir. Relax. The chief doesn't have to go through all of this trouble, only to exile us here. Carlone's voice was full of calmness and confidence. The chief might have decided on this action on the spur of the moment. When the people from Grey Castle find that their goals can't be realized, our work will end. As to 3 months of salary, OSHA can't get away with it. That's right, or no one will ever trust them again. That's reassuring. I'm okay as long as we can go back. The clansmen nodded, indicating their agreement, except for Simbadi. He did not entirely agree with what Carlone had said. It was true that Grey Castle had undervalued the desert and their plan of turning Endless Cape into a town was destined to fail. But looking at those soldiers in uniforms whose facial expression was nothing but solemn, he faintly felt the chief did not decide on this action on the spur of the moment. By then, the crowd began scattering and some people began to move toward the Iron Tower. Thuram was still talking with the people from Grey Castle, totally indifferent to what was happening around him. "Shall we go there too?" some clansmen proposed. "I think so," Carlone said, nodding. "If we're really going to camp around the Iron Tower, we can get a better place if we go earlier. Everybody, follow me." He took a look at Molly especially and asked, "Do you want my help with your luggage?" Molly hesitated, shook her head and then said, "Somebody said we'd better wait for Sir Thuram's instruction. Didn't he always emphasize the importance of following the discipline? It's not like we refused to get off the boat. Why does he care about this?" "Somebody, you're not intimidated by the Endless Cape, are you? Perhaps he's still sick." The clansman who ridiculed him previously did so again. "I'm just worried." Somebody raised his head. Just when he was about to justify himself, a burst of a hasty whistle interrupted him. "Everybody, gather now." Thuram, who previously ignored those who left, quietly walked in front of the clansmen, stuck out 3 fingers and grimly said, "I give you 3 breaths of time, after that, every breath means 1 whip. This is the second lesson I'm teaching you. Do remember that." Chapter 803, Festivity. Somebody had thought it was just a bluff. He had never expected Osha clan was serious. When the warriors from Osha clan were about to execute the order, a clash broke out between the two groups. Over 50 people, who regarded the punishment as unreasonable and attempted to escape the discipline, started to tussle with the ones who tried to catch them. Unarmed, the wrongdoers soon lost their battle to Osha clan equipped with clubs and shields. They were, as a result, stripped naked and prostrated to the sandy ground. Thuram whipped them himself. The whipping scene inflamed some of the spectators, who were on the verge of starting a virulent altercation but were eventually deterred by the flintlocks carried by Grey Castle men. Everybody had learned the miserable defeat of the watchdog in the oasis that night. Even cavalrymen swift like winds had failed to penetrate Grey Castle's defensive line. What had crushed them was exactly the same shiny iron weapons in those soldiers' hands. In a second, screams and shrieks filled the bank. Osha did not plan to flog those clansmen to death. After he showed their bleeding backs to the whole group, he instructed them to treat the wounds with herbs and bandage them with gauze. Normally, there was rarely any plague in the freezing months of demons. As long as they were physically strong, they should survive the whipping. Carlone and most of the clansmen were outraged, except Molly, who rejoiced over the punishment. After the fearsome whipping was over, the group formed 2 lines and headed to the depth of the desert under the guidance of the whistle. Thuram did not utter a word, but everybody became automatically self-disciplined. The procession was in an exceptional order. When they were close to an iron tower, somebody discovered a drying oasis, or rather a pond. This was probably what Thuram referred to as the water fountain for the vanguard. No shades of trees overhung the pond, except a few dying bushes around it. The pond was very shallow, the depth of which was no more than a man's height. Perhaps it had been a verdant oasis a few decades ago. However, as the water vein of Silver Stream gradually diminished, the oasis, in the end, reduced to a cup of sand. The pond would not even suffice to provide drinking water for the few hundred laborers working here, let alone to nurture a tribe. That water could still be seen was because of the remnant of underground streams. Once summer came, those meager water would soon evaporate under the scorching sun. Even if no one drank the water, the pond would become completely dry in no time. Somebody had seen a lot of ruins of oasis like this. In other words, if those Grey Castle men failed to find a new water source within 2 or 3 months, they would have no choice but to leave this land, not to mention establishing a new town. Thuram did not pretend that he was not aware of the scarcity of the water. He hollered at the team, "Do you see this pond here? This is going to be the only drinking water for us in the next couple of months. So, make your water elsewhere. Are you all clear?" "What about food, someone asked. Somebody will deliver food to us. If there isn't enough, we can go fishing, Thuram replied. Hearing they would at least have food and water, all the clans relieved a little bit. The group thus dispersed and pitched their tents based on the instructions of the supervisor from Osha clan. How to quickly set up and take down a tent was a must-have life skill for every Sand nation. A tent made of sheepskin could shelter 3 to 6 people, and usually, one person was responsible to carry all the required tools and equipment. There were only 4 women from Fishbone clan who had applied for the job, so they erected 3 tents which arrayed in a triangle shape, each of which was fastened by a rope. The door of each tent was flung open facing outward, as a way to alert each other in case of danger. This was the simplest tent arrangement among all. In the afternoon, Thuram whistled again and summoned everybody. He then took them to a place close to the beach. Somebody was surprised to find out that northerners had conducted a thorough search here. On the flat sandy ground stood numerous short wooden poles, each pole tied to a white rope. Like dividing domains, these ropes and poles segmented the land into many huge rectangles. Each rectangle was 60 meters in length at least. The most incredible thing was that all the rectangles were of the same size, every edge and corner of which was precisely marked and measured. Somebody wondered how they did that within a distance of 60 meters. There were 50 or 60 rectangles marked out by white ropes by a rough count. Somebody also saw some Greycastle men keep marking the land with wooden poles, with strange tools in their hands. It seemed they planned to continue to do so until all the land in their sights was covered. You're finally here. A tall man came up to Thuram. My name is Kankuri. I'm a former member of the Mason Guild in the Old King's City. Well, you've probably never heard of this organization. Even in Greycastle, few people remember the Mason Guild these days. Thanks to the benevolent king who's willing to hire us, we're able to settle down. Otherwise, we probably don't know where we'll end up. That's not quite right. Let's leave this matter at a later date. The man coughed and patted Thuram on his shoulder. Anyway, I'll be responsible for the construction of Endless Cape. I assume you're the supervisor appointed by Miss Echo, right? Echo? Isn't it Lady Drow Silverman's nickname? Somebody was shocked by the fact that the Greycastle men named Kankuri sat as equal with the chief at the same table. Not accustomed to the small talks and Kankuri's over-elaborate formalities, Thuram made a stiff smile. He stepped back and bowed. Please call me Thuram. As to those lads, just let me know what they should do. If anyone slacks off, I'll punish them severely. Apparently, Thuram had received instructions from the chief of Osha clan, for he paid great respects to Kankuri. But somebody knew it was those Greycastle soldiers guarding this area that Thuram was truly afraid of. Kankuri stretched out his arms. Very well. Guys, there's no tavern or woman here. Ahem, I mean that kind of woman. So, concentrate on the construction. The first task for you is very simple, which is digging holes. See those white rectangles? Dig a hole in each rectangle until the sand has reached your knees. For a moment, nobody responded. There was an embarrassing silence. Thuram's brows went up. He bellowed, "Are you guys all deaf? Get your ass moving." He sounded quite ill-tempered, but a hint of triumph in his eyes betrayed his complacency. But Kankuri raised his hand and stopped Thuram. Hang on. No need to rush. I haven't explained to them why we have to dig those holes. Sir, you don't have to explain to them. No, no, no. His Majesty once said something that I can't agree more. He calls it proactivity. Right, that's the word. Kankuri clapped his hand. It roughly means that once a person knows the reason behind his labor, he'll become more productive. So, listen carefully. These holes will determine whether we can live here in the future. These holes, he paused for a second and then continued, are the key to converting seawater to drinking water. The group immediately stirred up at these words. The mechanism behind this is very simple, but only King Roland thought of it. It's just like boiling water, we are going to first feed these holes with seawater. Once the water is heated up by the sun and turns into water vapor, we collect them to get pure drinking water. Cheng Yan even used his hands to further explain the matter. It's okay, you don't understand. You just view the ocean as a giant pool of bitter water saturated with salt. If we can separate the salt from the water, the whole swirl sea will become our drinking water source. Somebody was rooted to the ground. He doubted if this project was realistic. Put aside the validity of the theory in the latter half of his speech. He wondered how they were going to collect such intangible things as water vapor. Cheng Yan clenched his fist. The production will naturally be very limited. One rectangle can only provide water for a dozen people. Therefore, we have to build a large number of conversion sheds to supply water for hundreds of workers here. You should all feel lucky, for His Majesty pays special attention to the construction plan of Endless Cape. This is also the second town named by the king other than Neverwinter. To celebrate the unification of the southernmost region, His Majesty endowed the town with the name Festivity, and you guys are not only the builders of Festive Harbor but also the first residents who settled down here. Chapter 804, An Accident at the Snow Mountain. As soon as Lightning returned to her tent at the campsite, she took off her goggles, peeled off her gloves, and put her frozen, numb hands above the brazier. Her fingers soon started to tingle. Although it had been almost half a month since winter had ended, flurries of snow persisted without any sign of turning lighter. On the contrary, it grew increasingly heavy. Every time Lightning returned from an investigation, her hair was drenched with melted snow, and it always took a while before sensations came back into her skins. After her hands were a bit warmer, Lightning placed a stool next to the brazier, took off her soggy leather boots, and cocked her feet above the blazes. She could clearly see a wisp of white steam stream out of the tip of her socks. A tinge of warmth went through her cold toes. She was a little abashed by the smell of her feet. Having worn the same boots for such a long time, it was natural that the feet gave off some odor. Now she understood why her father always stressed that a great explorer should be supported by a great team. Had the First Army not set up the brazier or made hot water aforetime, she would not have been able to fully dedicate herself to the exploration. Her burning enthusiasm for exploration would definitely be quenched by the frustrating thought that she had to lit a fire and boil water herself after returning to the campground, all soaked and exhausted. Lightning thought perhaps only King Roland's team had the capability to supply hot water 24 hours a day. Her father had once told her in one of his adventure stories that it was indeed very difficult to have a hot water bath in midwinter. The obstacles lay in dampened wood, rotted leaves covered by snows, and the time and effort to collect those materials. As such, most of the time his crew members would thoroughly cleanse their bodies only after they fulfilled their undertaking. But the machines invented by His Majesty completely solved these problems. As the campsite was not far away from the riverbank, the boilers on the 3 concrete boats, which had been in operation since the first day of their arrival, were able to continuously provide the camp with hot water. If she required hot water, she just needed to take a bucket to fetch some. The same applied to food. A peculiar concrete boat was responsible for food supplies for the whole team. The upper floor of the boat constituted a mobile kitchen, where a large amount of oatmeal was cooked every day with the steam produced by the boiler. They ate the oatmeal with some dried meat and salted fish, so much better than tasteless solid food. It was probably the best logistics team in the world by her father's standard. After her hands and feet became warm again, Lightning took out her notebook and began to write journal entries. Spring 16th, we were still digging. The mountain greatly impeded Sylvie's and Margie's abilities, especially Margie's. They had to consume a lot of magic power in order to penetrate thick rocks. Out of safety concerns, we must reserve sufficient magic power to head back to the camp for each operation. As a result, we didn't gain much progress. Due to a limitation in the distance, Sylvie could just roughly pick a few directions for Miss Fran to dig. By the way, Miss Fran is a very nice lady despite her misshapen figure. She looks even scarier than Maggie when eating. I really hope that I can, one day, see what she originally looked like. It had been 13 days since they had arrived at the foot of the snow mountain. The only thing they were positive for now was the existence of a big hollow space, which appeared to be connected by multiple caves in the mountain. It was hard to successfully find the main cave where the ruin was located, let alone to open a tunnel wide enough for the First Army. Both she and Maggie could not help much in this respect. They could only put sentries outside the mountain or sneak into those strange caves to investigate the ruptures and crevices that the magic arc failed to reach. Compared with the exploration of the ruin itself, finding a correct path leading to the destination was always the most time-consuming part that often required the most efforts and work. Just as what her father frequently said, an explorer was always on his way. Lightning cupped her mouth and exhaled a breath which soon turned into a cluster of white steam in the cold air. She continued to write the followings. Last came the latest finding of Lightning, the greatest explorer in Grey Castle. We spied a long, dark figure underneath the ice at the peak of the Great Snow Mountain. It looked like a huge fish. I had no idea how long it took the creature to grow so big, but it must taste good. It was a pity that Anna didn't come with us. We couldn't break the ice to catch it. Maggie could only leave some scratching marks on the ice with her claws, for it was forbidden to employ explosives at the top of the mountain. We probably have to wait until summer when the snow melts. At these words, Lightning licked her lips. Because of the exploration, she had not tasted barbecued fish for a long time. Perchance she could fly to Misty Forest with Maggie to get some food before nightfall. She probably also needed to get food for Wendy so that she would not blame her for her roguishness. Lightning continued to write. Further, there was another significant finding. We had noticed some demonic beasts group up to the east of Misty Forest, but His Majesty's city wall should be able to block them. After writing all these down, Lightning put the sheepskin notebook into a watertight bag and slipped it back into her knapsack. As an explorer, she must record everything she saw on a daily basis. Like a captain's logbook, the journal was not only an explorer's badge of honor but also important references for future explorers. When the owner of the logbook was unfortunately killed in an accident, other explorers would be able to analyze his journal and avoid trotting the same path. Just at that moment, Lightning heard running footsteps outside the door. It was Wendy outside her tent. Agatha and the others are back. Wendy sounded a little anxious. We've had an accident. Fran's missing. What? Lightning rose in surprise. Missing? By the time the witches stationed at the campground arrived at the end of the tunnel created by the devouring worm, the soldiers from the First Army had lit a fire and put sentries. They found Agatha and the tequila witches arguing over something. Lightning poked her head and gasped. She saw a fathomless hole in front of her, its ceiling and bottom indiscernible. She could only hear the sound of running water coming from above. A part of the tunnel's edge had collapsed. Lightning took out the stone of lighting and bent over. The crack was covered with slimy liquid. Did Miss Fran fall from here? Edith answered, looks like so for now. Sylvie picked the right direction, but Fran was just unlucky. She opened the path leading to the big cave but did not notice the precipice at the front. Then she fell to the bottom. Looks like? Lightning noticed her particular wording. Edith shrugged. At that time Sylvie and Margie were searching on the other side, a location where they could exactly see what Fran was doing. According to Sylvie, Fran's magic reaction suddenly disappeared from her sight. I don't really know how your magic power works, but Miss Sylvie's eye of magic should be able to see very distant objects, right? Yet when they got here, they couldn't see anything at the bottom. Couldn't see? The little girl was stunned. Edith spread out her hands. They couldn't see the bottom or the devouring worm. There are two possible explanations. One is that the hole is so deep that it goes beyond the visual field of the eye of magic. The other is that something has blocked her vision. Either of them omens ill. Edith paused for a moment and looked at the arguing Ice Witch and the others. What they're arguing about is whether they should dive into the hole to rescue Fran immediately. Chapter 805, Down the Abyss. Lightning was silent. She knew Edith was right. If the hole was indeed extremely deep as Edith had described, she could almost predicate the fatality of the fall. If it was because of some intervention of Fran's magic power, the situation would then be even more complicated. There could be a gigantic godstone of retaliation at the bottom, in which case, she foresaw no great treachery. If there was, however, a trap set up by some unknown enemies, it would then be too dangerous for the rescue team. There was a big chance that those swift-sickle monsters and the worm carrier that had once devoured the demon's Blackstone Pagoda were still lurking around the Great Snow Mountain. Without any alerts from Nightingale and Sylvie or the protection of the First Army, even the God's Punishment witches found it hard to bring Fran back safe and sound. The little girl took a deep breath. Exploration was essentially a risky business. A good explorer should save his companion no matter under what circumstances. She thus came up to the arguing witches and said, "Let me take a look down there." "However we're going to do that, we have to first know what's going on before taking the next step." A blond man turned around and asked, "Your ability is?" Lightning remembered he was called Elena. Although she looked like a man by her appearance, the soul beneath the shell was literally an ancient witch from Tequila. Lightning tapped her goggles on the head. "Flying. Judging from the current situation, I believe I'm better at scouting than you." Agatha frowned. "This isn't a matter of convenience. How are you going to head back if you can't apply your ability at the bottom of the cave?" His Majesty said nobody should act alone in this operation, whether she's a witch from the Witch Union or Tequila. Everybody should work together and cooperate with the First Army. "Tie a rope around my waist then." Lightning disclosed all her plan. "Even if there's really an anti-magic zone created by a godstone of retaliation, as long as you pull me up after I reach the bottom, there shouldn't be a problem." To save a companion did not mean acting recklessly. Her father had told her numerous stories regarding horrible emergencies when she had been little. Lightning believed that most accidents would end up well as long as they took proper measures. Because she was the greatest explorer even without her magic power. Nightingale intercepted, "Let me go with her. I can walk along the precipice easily, for there's no upside or downside in the misty world. Even if an enemy does emerge, I can come to her aid immediately." Wendy shook her head vigorously. "That would be as dangerous as acting alone. If there's a trap down there, you two guys won't be able to save yourselves. Don't forget that there are formidable enemies like senior demons in this world. We'll never abandon Fran. If you don't go, I'll go myself." Elena blurted out in a low voice. "Have you forgotten to obey orders after 400 years? There's a faint starchiness in Agatha's voice. "In the name of the Tequila Senior Witches, I forbid you to act alone." Hearing this, all the God's Punishment witches fell silent. Elena bit her lip. At length, she stepped a few paces back and made an apology by placing her hand on the chest. "You don't need to argue about it," Edith ventured. "His Majesty instructed that we three parties must work together. Therefore, we just need to send the First Army down there, don't we?" "Did you find the way there?" Brian, the superintendent of the First Army, asked in surprise. "No, but I found this." Edith pointed to the cliff close to the entrance. In the torchlight, the reflective light specks on the river splintered up into flickering glimmers as the water ran. "There should be some lifting equipment on the concrete boat used to make oatmeal, for I often see the soldiers transport food from the supply boat through a crane. They don't do it manually." "Ah, that's the gondola." Brian nodded. "It can transport a lot of goods at a time, but it requires a steam engine. So, we just need to move the machine here from the boat and send 2 machine gun squads down there along with the witches." Edith stressed each syllable with a stroke. "The length of the rope can be adjusted through a connector. The God's Punishment witches shall have no problem in handling heavy machines. The water here can guarantee a constant operation as well as a retreat route required by His Majesty. The only question is how to take it down. I believe the First Army shall know how to do it, right?" Brian replied hesitatively, "We definitely can take it down, but it's hard to put it back." Edith raised her brows. "Then you'll only lose a boat and a steam engine, which totals no more than 500 or 600 gold royals. What choice do you think His Majesty would make if he were you?" Lightning twitched her lips. 500 or 600 gold royals was absolutely not a small number. It did not take long for Brian to make his decision. He soon gave a nod of approval and said, "I see. You'll soon find a steam engine ready to go." An hour later, a roaring machine appeared at the entrance to the hole. As they found it hard to fix the arm of the gondola to the rocks, they abandoned this part of the device in the end but only used a capstan as the lifting apparatus. The capstan rotated swiftly as the flywheel of the steam engine moved. It thus dropped the rope down the hole little by little. In order to prevent chafe, Agatha summoned her power and wrapped the mouth of the hole with solid ice so that the rope could move up and down without rubbing against the cliff. A huge iron basket, which could at least carry 6 to 8 people and 2 Mark-I-type HMGs, was attached to the end of the rope. In that case, the witches would be still well protected by the powerful machine gun squads even if they lost fighting capacities. Agatha, Elena, and 6 soldiers from the First Army crawled into the basket first, followed by Lightning and Nightingale. After testing out the lifting equipment, everybody slowly sank into the deep hole. The torchlight above became increasingly dismal. Lightning hovered somewhere a little below the center of the hole to lead the way, with a rope around her waist. She felt a little uneasy without Maggie flying beside her, but she knew someone must be stationed outside the snow mountain. In comparison to monitoring demonic beasts, she preferred to uncover the mystery of the underground ruin. Every time she dropped 10 meters lower, she would turn around to see if everybody was still there. Darkness swallowed up the meager light of fires lit by the sentries. The only source of light now was the 2 stones of lighting in the basket. In the steady, soft light of the stones, Lightning detected 2 pale golden ribbons running along the cliff. They were the ice created by Agatha. The solid ice smoothed out the protruding rocks, making them as reflective as a mirror, and thus ensured them a safe ride down to the bottom. Lightning's heart gradually sank after she flew for a few hundred meters. An ordinary man would hardly survive such a long drop. She now only hoped that the devouring worm could be stronger than that. Just at that moment, Lightning noticed a strange reflection underneath. The light was hardly perceptible. It was merely a thin thread of flickers like an eye that suddenly opened in the darkness. Lightning signaled the rest of the party with the stone of lighting. She plunged into the hole while holding her breath, after which, she stepped on a solid, smooth rock. Lightning bent over and gently touched the ground. The gleamy black rock was as polished and glassy as a crystal. Its dark reflection was mixed with a thick cluster of a bright red color. She had seen this. It was the giant Blackstone Pagoda in the Devil's Town. Previous. Chapter 806, An Egg. It looks like that the worm found its lair. As soon as the basket reached the ground, Agatha glanced about the surroundings while holding the stone of lighting. The furrow between her brows deepened. She asked, "Did you see Fran?" "Miss Fran isn't here." Lightning had inspected every corner of the cave. "The Blackstone Pagoda seems to be stuck in here. There are some empty spaces on either side of the tower. Could she fall off the top and roll over to the side?" The diamond-shaped stone tower spanned across the deep hole like a bridge, with its 2 ends rooted in the rocks. Nobody knew how it ended up like that. The tentacle demon and the multi-eyed demon could not be found anywhere either. "The tower doesn't affect my magic power," Nightingale revealed herself from the mist. "But you can't walk through it like you walk through a wall, can you?" Agatha squatted down and produced an ice piton. She threw it toward the Blackstone Pagoda. The ice piton immediately broke to pieces, whereas the stone tower remained intact. There's a rumor saying that this tower is made of God's stones of retaliation. Although it won't affect magic power on a mass scale like the prism of magic stone, it can block it. Elena corrected Agatha in a low tone, "It's not made of God's stones of retaliation but it creates them. Corrosive magic power can change the mineral vein of the magic stones and thereby shapes them into a rectangle stone tablet. Only the mineral vein born under the bloody moon, however, has the capability to create red mist. The others simply help slow down the dissipation of the red mist. This was a top secret in the Union Age. We learned it from Lady Eleanor after the fall of Tequila." Nightingale was displeased at the delay of the information. "Why didn't you tell us earlier?" Elena snapped, "You didn't tell me there's going to be a demon spire. There are so many things that can possibly affect magic power. How am I supposed to know which one it is?" Lightning flew in between them and intercepted their confrontational conversation. "We have to keep going down, as we haven't got to the bottom yet. I just managed to dive a little bit more and heard distant running water. It's very likely that there's an underground river down there. If Miss Fran did fell down from the side of the stone tower, she might still be alive." Elena's voice brightened. "Really? Is it possible that Sylvie didn't find Fran because of this underground river?" Agatha nodded. "Very likely. As the stone tower has blocked most of the vision of the Eye of Magic, Sylvie couldn't see the bottom. If Fran was flushed down by the water, naturally she couldn't detect her magic beam." She then turned to Lightning and said, "You fly up to tell Wendy first. Ask her to instruct Margie to send some God's punishment witches down here, as well as the soldiers from the First Army. Advise them to also put sentries here. We'll continue with our search." The little girl nodded. "All right, leave it to me." With the help of the gondola and the magic ark, they soon had enough people to rescue Fran. Lightning took advantage of this interval and thoroughly investigated the area below the Blackstone Pagoda. As she had expected, the vertical cave wall soon moved into a sloping position. The air also dampened. After she descended for another 30 to 40 meters, she saw a wide underground river. Snow water trickled down the cave wall and pooled before cascading into a thundering waterfall that poured down in torrents from the mouth of the cave. When the little girl drew close, she could feel a crisp chill play upon her cheeks. As a result of the moist air in the cave, at the bottom of the hole grew various mosses and mushrooms, one of which gleamed a ghostly blue light that lit up the surrounding area. Even without a stone of lighting, Lightning could clearly spy the outline of the cave. With the fireflies floating about, the underground area looked like an entirely different world. When the Ark took the witches and the tequila survivors to the bottom, they were all fascinated by what they saw. Nightingale exclaimed, "If only we can grow those glowing fruit in Neverwinter. In that case, everybody can clearly see the road at night. Let's bring some back and grow them." Lightning rubbed her hands in excitement. To discover and grow some new species was one of the most common enterprises for explorers. Sugar canes and corns, for instance, were brought to the fjords from other small islands by explorers and later flourished. Lightning was not sure if these giant mushrooms and illuminating cattail fruits would be as sweet and delicious as birdbeak mushrooms. Agatha started a head count. "Let's finish our business here first. Margie, you stay here to help the First Army to establish a sentry post. We'll continue with the procession along the underground river. If Fran is more than 2 miles away from us, we'll pitch some temporary tents." Nobody made an objection. Lightning, Nightingale, and Agatha all knew how to escape and protect themselves. The 10 Gods Punishment Witches led by Elena were all exceptional combatants as strong as extraordinaries. They did not constitute a huge group, but it was actually the most powerful combination in the United Front. Once in the limestone cave, the roar of the rushing water rang off the rocks and down the underground river, producing thunderous reverberation. Lightning had to keep a close distance with the group so as to hear everybody. Agatha asked, "Can the devouring worm swim?" Elena shook her head. "Nobody has seen it swim. But the worm is colossal, so I think it shouldn't be far away from the deep hole even if it was flushed downstream. Are you able to tell where this river comes from and head?" Another God's Punishment Witch put in. Lightning vaguely remembered that her name was Zoe. Nightingale answered, "If I remember correctly, it comes toward us and heads to the Snow Mountain. In other words, it's a water vein from the western region heading to the hilly area in the south." It was a known fact that there was plenty of underground water in His Majesty's domain, but Lightning wondered why those rivers ran toward the south, for there was not a single river there. She was curious where all those water went. Suddenly, she saw something flutter on the rock not far away. "Hang on, I saw something move there." Hearing her warning, everybody halted and drew out their weapons. Nightingale immediately gave an affirmative answer. "No magic reaction is detected, but there's indeed something over there, she then paused and slowly approached the object. It looks like a semi-spherical egg? What? Agatha was a bit surprised. Since it doesn't have magic power, it poses no threat to us. Elena waved at the god's punishment witches coming with her and said, "Follow me." They soon successfully surrounded the egg. When Lighting made a close study of the tremulous egg, however, she knitted her brows. A layer of gray skin was clinging to the rock, completely blending with the surrounding environment. When she held up the stone of Lighting and gradually approached the skin, she spied many stomas opening and shutting as if it were breathing. Elena coughed out a spittle. "What the hell is this? It's gross. If it's really an egg, how big should its parent be?" Lighting roughly measured the area of the skin with her fingers and concluded that it was about 3 meters in length and width. The swollen part in the middle could almost house a full-grown dairy cow. The shape. No, it can't be. Zoe took a sharp intake of breath. She drew out her longsword and gave the skin a fierce stab, after which she pulled the steel upwards. A large amount of slimy liquid gushed out of the egg as a piercing shriek rang off the cave wall. Then they saw a black shadow come out of the swell and collapse to the ground. To Lightning's dismay, it was a mad demon. Chapter 807, Inside the Ruins. Almost at the same time, the entire skin shrunk and rolled, and a worm climbed out of the stone wall. With runny mucus pouring out of its skin, it then quickly climbed towards the top of the cave. But Nightingale was much faster. She suddenly appeared from the mist and hung upside down on the cave ceiling as agilely as she was on flat ground and blocked the worm's way ahead. Before falling to the ground, she stabbed a shining dagger into the worm's head and nailed it firmly to the stone wall. The worm struggled for a while, and then all of its 6 legs drooped. It was dead. At that moment, Lightning finally noticed that the egg was merely the worm's torso. With its head and legs buried in stones and blocked by its giant belly, its torso did look like an egg. The worm's figure was out of proportion. Its front part resembled an enlarged ant, with the length of no more than half a meter. Its rear part, namely the skin part that enveloped the mad demon, was big enough to hold 3 large barrels inside. Although over a half of the mucus had spilled out and the swollen skin had shrunken, its area was still astonishing. "Is the demon born out of its belly?" the little girl asked in surprise. "I've never heard of something like that." Agatha crouched and carefully studied the demon under the light of a magic stone. "This mad demon is completely mature. Look at its arm. The scar here is caused by the inlay of a magic stone. Its girth is larger than the other arm, meaning the demon had constantly thrown pikes with magic power." "Then where is the magic stone?" "No idea. It's probably been taken away." "So was it taken by this worm?" Elena asked impatiently. "It swallowed the demon and digested it while hanging itself on the wall. Unfortunately, it came across us. Its magic stone was either digested by itself or lost during a war. Does this make sense? Don't worry about this disgusting worm, looking for Fran is more urgent." "It swallowed the demon?" Lightning questioned in her heart. "Its mouth is not big enough for an adult human being to go through, not to mention for a strong mad demon of nearly 3 meters tall." "That's weird," Nightingale's voice came from the void. "Obviously it's dead, but why didn't its magic power dissipate until now?" "What?" Agatha was surprised. "Do you mean this is a demon?" "Yes, its magic power is as thin as mist. I didn't notice it until it rolled out of the worm's belly. But it's surely dead. Judging from the decomposition level of its skin, it died 1 or 2 days ago." Nightingale then asked with bewilderment, "I thought that it was impossible for magic power to gather on a dead body?" "If you saw it right, it is indeed weird," Zoe nodded. Inserting the sword deep into the stone wall, she then said, "Perhaps we should take these 2 bodies back for further investigation. Let's leave a mark here and collect them when we finish camping." As they walked forward, they ran across more egg worms, and again, though not all were buried under the stone wall, some were standing right beside the river bank or were in a cluster like mushrooms. Being experienced, the witches could now make sure their strikes hit right at the worms' crucial points or cut their heads off, which were buried under the dirt, one after another. Cutting open the worms' bellies, they found that there were not only mad demons inside, but also fearsome demons and human bodies. That startled the witches. Beyond the border area, there was no human residence. How did the worms hunt humans? Could it be that the worms had stretched their legs into the domain of Neverwinter without a trace? At that moment, Nightingale suddenly alerted, there is a magic reaction ahead. Wait, no, is that, Fran? Where? Elena did not rush forward, but fanned out with the other gods' punishment witches, holding their swords and guarding all around. Lighting understood that in the misty world, everything was black and white, and most of the objects she saw were constituted by visualized and twisted silhouette lines, except the magic power, which was in bright colors. That was why the dark underground environment had no influence on Nightingale. Front left, 200 meters, about 400 steps. She seems to be entangled by something. Nightingale's voice went further and further and was blurred under the noise of water sprays. I can't see. I'll go first. Wait. A moment later, 2 gunshots sounded. Bang! Bang! The firing of the flintlock sounded particularly loud under the ground. The gods' punishment witches took a look at one another and walked forward while maintaining their formation. Lightning was faster. She flew over them and toward the gunshots while firmly holding the revolver in her hand. Luckily, what she had worried about did not happen. Soon, Nightingale held up the stone of lighting to guide the way. Lying under the witch's feet were 2 monsters with sickle-like forepaws. The flintlock shots made 2 holes on the worms' heads and blue blood flew on the ground. Are these the demonic beasts that you mentioned which can hide their figures? Floating in midair, Lightning asked. Yes, but no matter how skillful they can't hide from my eyes. Nightingale put away her revolver and patted at Fran, who was tightly stuck. She asked, am I right? Fran struggled a bit and groaned something, but it seemed that her mouth was sealed. Nightingale noticed that both sides of the worm carrier were winded with white jelly which firmly fixed Fran on the ground. Her giant mouth was blocked too. Other than that, her strong body was full of wounds. Apparently, when she fell out of the deep hole, it hurt her badly. Furthermore, to Nightingale's surprise, there was more than one such giant worm. Another 2 devouring worms quietly lay on the ground, as if they were in deep sleep. Is this? An idea flashed into Lightning's mind. She quickly landed and pushed aside the moss on the ground. A mottled slate appeared in sight. Oh? Nightingale whistled. Nice, it seems that we've found the legendary Snow Mountain ruin, she said with excitement. What happened? The others arrived one after another. In order not to stretch their formation too loosely, the gods' punishment witches had moved at a fixed speed. Walking in the front had always been Elena, which slightly changed Lightning's opinion on her. I found Fran, and 2 monsters who seemed to want to make a meal out of her, Nightingale explained briefly. Fran is all right, but stuck on the ground. This is already part of the underground ruins, which means enemies could be around. Let's take Fran out of here as soon as possible and call the First Army to set up sentry posts. Elena nodded, pulled out the heavy sword on her back, and neatly and quickly cut open those resilient jelly things. When Fran's giant mouth regained its freedom, everybody heard her low growling. Don't look up. When Lighting heard it, she had subconsciously raised her head. It was pitch black overhead, nothing could be seen at first sight. At this spot, the cave extended upward, creating an enormous dome-like space. The stone of lighting could only illuminate a very limited space on the ground, offering no detailed vision atop. The next moment, Nightingale felt that the fine hairs on her body rose up. In the darkness, appeared 1 scarlet eye, then 2 eyes, 3 eyes. She did not know how many eyes were staring at her at that moment. She saw those tens of thousands of eyes, like tens of thousands of stars, cohere into a gigantic red plate, which looked like a bloody moon. Chapter 808, Close Quarter Combat. Did you hear any sound? Edith looked at Brian, who was instructing the soldiers to arrange an underground defense line. Any sound? Brian stopped what he was doing, looked around in puzzlement, and said, "No, Miss Edith, I haven't heard anything except the sound of running water." "Really?" Edith frowned. "Am I mistaken? What kind of sound was that?" "Like the sound of a horn, very muffled, similar to the sound of water." Edith paused. "It seemed to come from the south." That was the direction where the witches went for a deep exploration. The turbulent underground river went from north to south, and disappeared in the pitch-black underground cave. Although there were weird illuminating plants on both sides of the river, they could not provide light for far-away places. The entire waterway was like an entrance to an abyss which devoured everything she saw. I think probably because we're deep in the mountain, which deprives us the vision of the sky, plus the lack of the light of a fire, you might be hallucinating." Brian smiled thoughtfully. "For the soldiers who have been to a battlefield, this isn't a big problem. It's no wonder that you might feel nervous. If you feel uneasy, Miss Margie can accompany you to return to the aisle exit." A familiar look, familiar words. Edith was not surprised by the speech of the gun battalion commander. Although she was in light leather armor and a helmet, with a walking sword hanging on her waist, most of the people there still took her as an observer from the city hall, or, as a pearl-like girl, just like her title, pretty and fragile. That was also the reason why people cared and pleased her all the way. What those people did not understand was that the pearls produced by the giant clams in the northern region had been soaked in blood. The blood of fish, of water beasts, or even of the fishermen. That was why they could grow so big, into the size of a fist. Roland Wimbledon was probably the only one who ignored her appearance in the beginning and even took her as an opponent. "Thanks, but I'm better off here. If I run back, doesn't it mean I'll humiliate His Majesty's City Hall?" Although Edith did not tell Brian what was in her mind, she rejected his suggestion with a smile. For a moment, Brian was lost in her smile. After a long while, he shunned away in embarrassment. "I don't think His Majesty or Barav would mind it." Brian coughed twice. "I just don't understand why you came with the First Army to such a dangerous place." "For only in this way could you trust me," Edith said frankly. What? "You must have heard of the Battle of Divine Will," she said calmly. "When such a battle that determines humans' lives comes, it'd be hard for His Majesty to consider every aspect of the war situation. He'll need many officers to assist him to command the army, and the army will depend on the City Hall for logistics. By that time, will you trust an officer who has fought with you shoulder by shoulder or one who sits in the office every day dealing with paperwork?" Brian was startled. After a moment, he said, "You're really brave to make such a speech." Edith understood what he was referring to. Even an indigenous former patrol leader understood what she meant. At best, what she wanted to do was called assistant commanding, or it could be called power interference, which was totally unbearable in the eyes of other lords who claimed total control of their knights. But now, the number of soldiers of the First Army had exceeded 5,000, so the knightage management method was obviously outdated. As a matter of fact, the advisor department assembled by His Majesty was an organization between the army and the City Hall, which was eventually under Roland's control, but the commanding right underneath would further spread. Because Edith understood Roland's ideas, she dared to make that speech. It was not that she intended to join the advisor department, but she wanted to extend her influence as much as possible. "If it was any other kings, I'd definitely not do that, but His Majesty is different," Edith said, smiling. "You know that it was me who proposed that anyone who wants to be promoted in City Hall needs to go to a battlefield first. This being said, it's better that I set an example for the others." "Has His Majesty agreed?" "Not really, but he didn't object to it." Doesn't it mean that he agreed?" Brian asked confusedly. "In politics, you can't interpret things this way," Edith said with her hands laid out. "Even an oral commitment may change any time before it gets written down, let alone the silence the king gave me for my asking." "I see," the gun battalion commander said with mixed feelings. "Politics is really complicated." "That's true." Apart from that, she also planned to get closer to the witches, to understand their abilities and characters, and to spend more time with them. Undoubtedly, His Majesty had exerted big efforts on the witches, and the construction of Neverwinter could not carry on without the witches. To reach the peak of power, she would need their support. So far, her plan had gone very smoothly. Probably because they were the same gender, her contact with the witches did not draw their rejection, yet Berev was not that lucky. Are the gods' punishment witches the next batch to come? Edith changed the subject. Yeah, I think so. Miss Margie can only deliver 5 to 6 people per time. To set a sentry post, she would have to run about 10 times, Brian replied accordingly. Where do you think the second machine gun should be positioned? Somewhere high. I remember there is a suitable location near the rock behind. Right when she turned around to observe the cave behind her, an illuminating plant seemed to distort in a certain way, as if something broke the stability of the air, making everything look blurry. What's that? She asked. Before she could alert the first army soldiers, the air was again acutely distorted. This time the air behind the machine gun squad members rippled. A light sound came, then a soldier's head fell off his neck, with a smile frozen on his face. Enemy attack! Edith shouted out, it's invisible. Almost at the same time, 2 more soldiers' chests were pierced through. When their blood spurted, the ripple was dyed red. There is more than one. Edith thought swiftly. Throwing a dagger with one hand toward the place where the first soldier fell, she pulled out her sword and raced to the enemy. When her dagger was knocked away by the invisible thing, she pricked her sword to the root of the ripple from another angle. Edith clearly knew that if they chose to retreat, they would end up being attacked from front and back. There was a bonfire at this place, which was their only source of light to find the enemy's whereabouts. Without light, they could find no way to resist these nearly invisible monsters, so escaping should be their last choice. While they could roughly locate the enemies, offense was their only chance to win. Through the sword tip came a sense of softness, as if it was pricked into some skin and flesh, which thrilled Edith. If she was not wrong, whether humans or beasts, the contacting point of a weapon and a body was definitely a weak point, such as a hand holding a sword or a tip of a claw, which if hurt, would not regain its attacking ability in any time soon. Just as Edith was about to draw back her sword, a chilly wind swept towards her from another direction, coming at a speed that was so fast that she felt coldness hitting right on her face. Damn it! This thing has 2 weapons? Years of experience in fighting and killing made her subconsciously loosen the sword-holding right hand and roll on the ground. At that moment, she felt something touching the back of her head and then her long hair flew about like fallen petals scattering everywhere. Having no time to get up, she shouted at Brian, now, shoot in my direction. Chapter 809, The Moment of Crisis. By the time that the soldiers realized what was happening, it was too late for them to adjust another machine gun in order to take aim, so they directly pulled out the revolving rifles tied on their backs to fire at the enemy. The long sword shoved in the invisible monster's body was now giving away its trail, making it an easy target for it to aim at. At such a short distance, Brian and all the other men fire all their bullets at once. The hail of bullets swept over Edith's head and she could even hear the whoosh sounds as the bullets tore through the air. She turned back and saw the distorted air had solidified as a monster emerged out of the void. It was blood-curdling. The monster wore a taupe shell all over and was nearly 2 meters tall while standing. A height that would allow it to tower over most ordinary men. Apart from a pair of forelegs as sharp as sickles, it also had 7 or 8 pairs of supportive legs sticking out of its abdomen. Luckily, the bullets were fierce enough to pierce through its shell, and they finally cracked open the monster's thin, long and locust-like head. It twitched a little and fell to the ground, bathed in blood. Get out of my way! Suddenly, someone roared behind Edith. A heavy sword preceded the voice, piercing through the air with a strong power that caused the blade to buzz. It smashed right in the space before the first machine gun squad, blowing away the other 2 monsters and dispelling the invisible rippling air. Hard on the heels of Ash's strike, several gods' punishment witches moved forward to slash the enemies, tearing their bodies into halves before they managed to get to their feet. The reinforcements finally arrived. Edith let out a sigh of relief as she realized it. The enemies had lost their advantage of invisibility, plus with their small numbers, it had not taken long before the transcendent warriors dismembered all of them. Edith noted that as the monsters inched nearer to the gods' punishment witches, their form turned weird, half of their body invisible in the void while the other half was revealed in the light as if their hiding skills had been abetted. "Are you all right?" Margie pulled Edith to her feet. "We spotted these enemies on the cliff and moved as fast as we could, but we're still a little too late." "You spotted them with the colorful magic stone?" "Yes." Another tall man came up to her. "Weapons of common people don't work well in this kind of situation. You'd better inform the people above to bring more gods' punishment witches down here." Edith remembered her name was Betty. She asked, "You're capable of destroying their camouflage?" "It's a trick that works the same way as the god's stone of retaliation." The man shrugged. "So far, it can only deactivate their invisibility skill for a short period of time. But they also were God's stone of retaliation. How could they not see the enemy?" Brian asked with his teeth gnashed, as he looked at the 3 dead men on the ground. "It's not surprising," Betty answered calmly. "For light, distance, and attention will all affect our sights. A general God's stone works only within the area of 1 or 2 paces. Since the enemy's only exposed in our visions for less than a second, it was reasonable that they couldn't see the targets, not to mention in such a dim place." Edith could not help sighing. Betty was right. They had not noticed the sickle monsters until they showed their half-bodies during the fight. The beast's long forelegs and invisibility skills had given them a great advantage. It was undoubtedly too late for ordinary people to react, even though they had sensed something wrong. There would have been no way for the First Army to defeat them unless they had buried God's stones beforehand to give them a clearer view to see through the enemy's disguises. "Damn it!" Brian wielded his fist fiercely. "I should have sent down the wire netting first. I think we should go back. I have a feeling that something unpleasant is going to happen in the hole," Betty urged again. The weird shriek almost startled the entire snow mountain. "Did you hear that too?" Edith asked in surprise. "Losing most of our sense of touch has made our eyes and ears extraordinarily sharp." Betty studied Edith for a little while before replying. "I didn't expect that a common person would be capable of hearing the sound too." Sure enough, it was not her illusion to hear the sound. Edith nodded as she removed her god's stone of retaliation and threw it next to the machine gun. She and the other men gathered around Margie, who weaved the magic Arkansas. Together they descended to the bottom and then ascended along the steep wall. Brian, the leader of the gun battalion, was slightly reluctant to hand over the front line to the tequila witches, but had to follow the trend. After all, once the gods' punishment witches were involved in the fight, they could not ignore the witches and fire at the enemies recklessly. The men who were stationed at the Blackstone Pagoda were unclear of the details of the battle at the bottom of the hole, so they kept sending down equipment such as tents, god's stones, guns, and ammunition, etc. After Brian commanded the soldiers to stop transporting, they did not transfer to the vacant steam engine-powered elevator but continued to ride the ark to ascend. Just as they were approaching the worm passage, a hail of gunfire broke out above them, causing a sound as if a mighty storm were striking. That meant that the First Army, which was guarding at the sentry post, had opened fire without leaving themselves a loophole. Their faces changed. Margie pumped up all of her power to accelerate the ark. As the magic ark dashed out of the hole, Edith could not help widening her eyes. Body parts were showering down from the upper cave. 3 machine gun squads that were lined up in one formation were firing at the pitch-dark ceiling of the cave under Sylvie's command. The revolvers and precision shooting squad concentrated on handling the blind corners above them, firing at the cave wall without taking aim. "What are you fighting against?" Brian caught one man and asked. "Demonic beasts, my lord," the man reported as he was loading ammunition. "A pack of demonic beasts charged down from Snow Mountain. Damn it. Why do they bother us at this time?" A thought suddenly flashed through Edith's mind. Could the muffled buzz be the sound of it summoning its own kind? It was something she had read from His Majesty's book, a unique sound in this world that was inaudible to the human ear but was particularly clear to some creatures. Some species were even able to make such sounds to help them communicate with each other in their own way. Was it possible that the sound they had heard was a kind of signal between the same species? However, misfortunes did not come alone. When Brian was watching the battle, one man ran in and reported to him, "My lord, Lady Maggie spotted the abnormal trail of demonic beasts in the east to Misty Forest. They seem to be marching on the snow mountain, moving towards Neverwinter as we expected." What? This, the leader of Gun Battalion was stunned for a moment. "My lord," the man asked urgently. "What do we do? How can this be?" Brian muttered repeatedly, his face grim, his forehead sweaty. Edith frowned at Brian's inexperienced behavior. In her view, a leader should never wear a bewildered look openly, especially in front of his men. "Ahem," she interrupted, "things are simpler than you think. First, if we summon back the First Army deployed outside the snow mountain and gather them to guard the cave, the battlefront will be much smaller and only a few machine guns will be needed to stifle the attack of the demonic beasts." Brian turned to look at her. It took him a long while, but he managed to compose himself. Exactly," he stuttered. "Second, tell Lady Maggie to contact His Majesty and ask for reinforcements, just in case. After all, our ammunition and food are supplied through Redwater River. Once we give up the entrenched passage, our battle couldn't last long because of the lack of replenishment." Edith said calmly and clearly. "The beasts can't swim, so we should keep the cement ships and deploy a dozen of men who will help to pin down the enemy as well as guide the reinforcements. Lady Sylvia'll be responsible for annihilating the demonic beasts on the ceiling of the cave. Temporarily, we should collect everyone's god stones and bury them at the sentry post in case of sneak attack from the enemy. Lastly, remember to send the tequila witches to the bottom of the hole to support Betty so that she'll have enough men to march on the south of the riverway to look for Agatha and the other witches." Edith's composed voice eased the tension and discomposure among the crowd. "We must send the witches to Betty as soon as possible. If I'm not wrong, the source of the weird sound will be the key to solving our problem." Brian inhaled deeply and said, "I see. Let's do as you suggested." Chapter 8:10, A Dilemma. I feel so disgusting." Agatha covered her mouth and retched as she crept along the worm carrier's narrow esophagus to get out. "I feel like I was in some kind of mucus-filled bag that was flung onto the wall dozens of times." "You couldn't find any words better than that?" Nightingale asked as she walked out of her mist leisurely. She stared at the others who were bathed in mucus. "If Fran hadn't collapsed the cave's mouth, we'd be in great danger." The advantage of walking in the mist, that enabled her to travel seamlessly between spaces, had saved her from needing to hide in the carrier's stomach, ultimately saving her from being bathed in the foul and corrupted mucus. "Sorry, did I act impulsively?" Fran asked warily. However, Agatha was too busy retching from the stench to reply. "For me, it was okay," Lightning said as she wiped mucus from her hair before smelling it. "Being swallowed by a giant worm and then crawling out safely is an unparalleled experience, an adventure that no other explorers have gotten to taste. Don't be too greedy." Elena rolled her eyes and said to Agatha, "For us, who have no senses, even smelling the reek and feeling the clammy touch is enviable." "Other gods' punishment," witches echoed her sentiment. "Fine, let us say no more." Agatha coughed and interrupted in a hoarse voice, "On to the next problem, what should we do?" There was fear lingering in every witch's heart as they recalled the accident from minutes ago. Despite Fran's quick warning, in that moment, the instinct to turn their eyes towards the source of the weird buzzing was faster than their minds could process the warning. As a result, more than one of them failed to keep their head down as the sound rang out. No one had been able to see the actual visage of the monster, all they could see was its 10,000 scarlet eyes. They believed that the cluster of eyes belonged to the watchful multi-eyed demon that had coiled on the top of the tower. The only image they could associate it with was the black stone tower that had been swallowed by the worm. However, unlike the ordinary multi-eyed demon, the scope of this one's eyes had been much wider, as if the demon's body had been flattened and considerably stretched. After the buzzing had subsided, a large number of hybrid demonic beasts emerged from the deep ruins and charged towards them. All Nightingale had been able to see while she was in the mist was the sudden appearance of numerous magic power light spots. They had abruptly appeared out of the void and from every corner of the cave. They had come from the stone walls, the streaming water, and the dark dome. The monsters had gathered together, creating bright streams, and their noisy, raspy roars drowned out the tinkling of the running water. It had been as if the entire mountain had come alive to chase off the intruders. In that moment of peril, it had been Fran who made the executive decision. She swallowed everyone, except for Nightingale, and turned so she could bore into the cave wall. Once her whole body had been submerged in the stone wall, the demonic beasts approached and started to snap at her tail fiercely. Even with Nightingale proving cover, she had been able to drive away so many enemies. Although she had been in pain, Fran persisted in tunneling about 30 feet into the rock formation before she rolled back onto her rear and smashed the demonic beasts with her giant body. Subsequently, she gathered all of her strength into her tail and whipped it hard against the ceiling of the tunnel, knocking down the stones. By blocking the mouth of the tunnel, she finally eliminated some enemies. During the struggle, the witches hiding in Fran's stomach had had an unforgettable experience. They tumbled and rocked inside the worm while she was fighting, and they nearly threw up. As if the rolling and whipping wasn't enough, they had also been confined next to the rotting meat that was in the digestive cavity, and it had reeked. Ultimately, at least, all of them were safe. First, we have to figure out what's going on. Elena looked at Fran. How did you get stuck down here? I think the rock formation must have been eroded by years of water washing, so it collapsed abruptly as I twirled in the passage. It all happened so fast that I was already Fallon by the time I realized what had happened. Then I knocked into something and blacked out, Fran said limply. When I woke up, I found myself being transported by dozens of invisible worms, and then they left me in this place. I see. They've taken you as a vacant carrier. Elena raised her eyebrows. At least, we're lucky. We're indeed very lucky, especially since we were not eaten on the spot, Fran muttered. It's a pity that I accidentally glanced up at the ceiling of the cave when I was about to escape. Is it really a watchful magic eye? Agatha asked in a deep voice. I don't know. The moment I saw it, it spotted me as well, but I'm not sure what it really was. This monster was much bigger than the multi-eyed demon. Fran sighed, exhaling a nasty wind that assaulted the people around her. Sorry, since Elena and the other gods' punishment witches lost their smell a long time ago, I stopped paying it any attention. Ahem, it's fine. Ice Witch Agatha held her breath for a long time before saying, Did you happen to get an overall view of the monster? After I had been bound, it landed and took its time as it bathed in the lake. Fran paused for a moment as she looked for the words. I don't know how to describe it. The monster looked like a failed experiment. It's like a lump of flattened guts that has been laid over the body of the multi-eyed demon. The two parts don't mesh naturally and they look more like a forceful patchwork. I also noticed that it had tentacles writhing in the gaps between the parts. I am not sure if they were living worms or a physical part of the monster. Regardless, that lump of the guts was much larger than the multi-eyed demon, even bigger than the fearful beast of hell. Is it possible that the monster is consuming demons? Nightingale frowned. I believe it can't be considered a simple hybrid demonic beast. I think we should figure out how to get out of here before we try to figure out what it is. Elena patted Fran's huge mouth. Next time, remember to alert us before telling us the details. Do you understand? Fran answered gloomily. Can you move now? I can't. I've run myself out, Fran shook her head. I consumed all the food in my stomach during the time we have been trapped here, so I need food for fuel. What if we give you the last of our food? Lightning suggested. That's barely enough for her to tunnel 100 steps. Elena took a deep breath. All we can do is wait or risk it and break out. Waiting isn't safe either, Agatha said calmly. The space in here is too small and we'll all suffocate in less than a day if we don't find a way out. Even if Sylvie manages to locate us, they will have to destroy the beasts before they can try to save us. She paused. Don't forget the enemy also possesses devouring worm carriers. Unfortunately, if we charge out now, it's unlikely we won't be devoured by the numerous beasts. The gods' punishment witches hesitated. Besides, what do we do about Fran? She can't escape and there's no way for her to defend herself from so many enemies. Anyway, let me check the situation outside first. Nightingale turned, unwilling to be involved in this dilemma. If you guys figure out a way to escape, don't worry about me, Fran said suddenly. Tequila witches don't fear death. I'll always belong to them no matter what I become. By the way, I've got something else in my stomach that may be of some help. She wriggled her body, slowly spitting out several sticky iron boxes. What's? The garrison supplies that the First Army asked me to carry, Fran said, coughing. They said these things were too heavy to carry and asked me for help, so I swallowed all of them. Agatha opened the boxes one by one. There were building tools and materials in them, such as shovels, spades, wire nettings, etc. As the things in the last box were revealed, Agatha froze for a moment. The iron box was not very large, but it was especially heavy. Apart from the shockproof wheat straw stuffing, there were a dozen wooden boxes labeled the second chemistry plant, sample 64, qualified. If she remembered correctly, most of the nitrogen generated during decomposition had been sent to this factory. This box actually held explosives. Chapter 8:11, Battle in the Mist. You mean these things are capable of cracking the mountain and the earth? Elena widened her eyes after she heard the Ice Witch's concise introduction about the explosives. She condemned angrily, what if these things explode in Fran's stomach? How could they not think of that? Fran's giant body could not help quivering at the thought. It's the lab sample that easily explodes, Agatha said as she rummaged through the box for a bag of copper pipe and showed it to Elena, not these kind of explosives, which won't ignite on ordinary impact or heat. The only way to make them explode is to put these pipes in explosive containers. The explosives had aroused the other gods' punishment witch's interest, who had heard of the splendid scene of the artillery exercise long ago from Phyllis, the gods' punishment witch who they called number 76. They had witnessed the First Army's battle against the incursion of demonic beasts a few times since moving to the western region of Grey Castle and were not unfamiliar with gunpowder. But this was their first time to be so close to this kind of weapon. Is it really okay to burn it? The thing that can create such a loud sound when it explodes should be very volatile at ordinary times. It looks very much like a brick. How to make it work? Does it explode once the copper pipe is put into it? Who dares to do that? The questions troubled Agatha too, for she only knew the general principle of those firearms that His Majesty had made. Her knowledge of how to use it was no more than her tequila fellows. The thing with the red mark on it is the detonator that must be ignited for it to work. Lightning suddenly leaned over and said professionally, the blue-marked one is the detonator that is needed to pull out the string to trigger it. I remember there is another kind of detonator with a yellow mark that will be activated by electric current, but this bag only has the red and blue ones. That got Agatha amazed, and she blurted out, how did you know that? Because I'm an explorer. The young girl touched her nose. I was basically present at every new weapon test that the First Army held. So, should we bury these things in the cave mouth beforehand and blow our way out or cast them along the way as we retreat and carry Fran with us? Elena tried to work out a solution. If the explosive could hold back the enemies, I believe 10 gods' punishment witches are able to move Fran. It doesn't matter, leave me behind. Shut up. Elena cut in. Even though we're not afraid of sacrifice, we'll never give up our companions easily. Don't forget what Lady Eleanor has told us. Every witch is of equal importance. The rest of the people joined in and nodded. I'm afraid, neither of your plans work, Lightning muttered. One bag of explosives is enough to tear us into pieces if you set it to work at the mouth of such a small cave. But if we put the explosives in a larger cave, the explosion will be unsatisfying. She looked at the shovels and spades on the ground and went on, the explosives should have been used to make caves or open passages. They're not formal weapons, and the fire and air current created in the explosion is only able to kill the beasts within 10 paces. A silence came over them, who knew that the explosion might be fearsome enough to drive away general beasts, but not the swarm of demonic beasts that were obviously summoned by the monster on the dome of the cave. They'll never stand a chance to get out unless most of those demonic beasts were destroyed. Maybe we have one more choice. Nightingale chimed in suddenly. Bring down their boss. You mean, the monster dwelling in the dome? Elena frowned. We can't fly. Even if you could fly, that's too dangerous. Agatha said before lightning found her words. It's not a defensive battle where we have support whenever we ask. We all know that it's not uncommon that some hybrid demonic beasts are able to fly, and lightning loses her speed and flying height considerably as long as she's load-bearing, so it's highly possible that she'll never get herself close to the monster once the enemies spot her and besiege her. I'm not proposing to make lightning do it, Nightingale said word by word. I'm planning to put this bag of explosive into the monster's mouth with my own hand, given it does have a mouth. You? Agatha was shocked. Don't be ridiculous. You should know that your mist can't hide anything in front of magic eyes. Wherever you see it, it notices you too. Its ability to see me doesn't mean that its underlings can notice me. I'm confident that I can get through them, even if they are under their boss's order to intercept me. She paused. Do remember that the mist can do much more than concealing. But... A cacophony coming from the rock formation interrupted Agatha's next words. It sounded as though numerous cicada were eating leaves, or gravel was clashing, being smashed and ground. The witches' faces changed. The sound was not unfamiliar to them. Damn it. They've sent the devouring worm, Elena said with a stern face. The enemy is coming. Get yourself ready. A worm carrier was hardly a threat, but as soon as their concealed vantage point was uncovered, they were to be faced with endless demonic beasts that traveled through the worm's stomach. Don't worry about me. No one is more competent in this kind of mission. Back at the time when the Witch Cooperation Association was running in the Old King City, my title was well known everywhere in the central region of the kingdom, Nightingale said as she packed 4 bags of explosives in her bag and bound it tightly on her back. At that time, people used to call me Shadow Killer. Wait. Rest assured. I'll finish that deformed thing before the worm tunnels its way here. Before Agatha could say anything to stop her, she disappeared into thin air. The last sight Agatha had of Nightingale was a thumbs up. In the world of black and white, directions meant nothing to Nightingale, and everywhere would become flat and level if she wished. It felt as though she was the manipulator of this world where everything was under her order. Passing through the collapsed stones, she straightway jumped up to the steep cliff and rushed to the dome of the cave. Suddenly, her vision changed the angle by 90 degrees. The monster that should have been above her hid somewhere was ahead of her now. The turbulent underground river looked like a ribbon beset on the precipice, while the broad subterranean lake now rose up like a huge window. By then, she had caught sight of the monster, and it had her in sight as well. Nightingale did not look away. With her eyes fixed on the monster's star-like eyes, she sped up to it. In the mist, the glare radiated from the monster's powerful magic cyclone and looked like a bloody moon, outshining the crowded light spots. This monster could not be a simple hybrid demonic beast, she thought. Its magic power outperformed even Anna's. For a moment, Nightingale sensed her mind had been connected with the monsters. The feeling was chaotic and unspeakable, but she was sure that both of them had received the undisguised hostility from each other. She grinned. The monster raised its tentacles. With a low roar, the demonic beasts in the cave flocked to her. Chapter 8:12, Segmentation. Nightingale soon discovered that she was right. Most demonic hybrid beasts could not locate her, so hardly any beasts could clamber onto the cliff to block her. The flying beast swooping in the midair looked terrifying but always missed her like an arrow that missed its target. As long as she kept moving, it was uneasy for those beasts to hold her back. The only beasts that could spot her were those mutated ones with sickle-shaped forelegs. They writhed their robust bodies and nailed their supportive legs in the stones so that they were able to move about the cliff. Under the command of the monster, they moved towards the dome of the cave, intercepting Nightingale and the alerted Magic Eye. She had to destroy those beasts before meeting head-on the monster. The vast dome of the cave had become Nightingale's personal battlefield. Fighting alone had been an experience she had not had for a long time. She had been walking alone in the mist in the past and had been forced to serve her wicked aristocratic relatives until Wendy had found her and helped her out of such miseries. But her feeling at present was dramatically different from the feeling she had had when she had roamed in the Silver City. Alone she felt no boredom or hatred in the least, for she volunteered to participate in this dangerous duel without being compelled or threatened. Her mind was saturated with the faith to protect her companions. Nightingale did not feel alone at all, for she was in the protective suit made by Soraya, with the explosives produced by Agatha in her bag, and the gun designed by Roland around her waist, which was engraved with the words, "To Veronica." All of these gears gave her a feeling that everyone was fighting alongside her. As she revolved a multitude of thoughts in her head, the enemies were drawing near. The beasts started to close up, their sickle-shaped forelegs in the air. There was a total of 16 of them. Nightingale took out the pistol, pulled the safety, and waited until the nearest beast was within a few paces. Then she went out of the mist as she pulled the trigger. The beast lurched to her at the same time. Its powerful tail and supportive legs enabled them to dash forward. The strike was completed in a split second, as quick as a predator plunging at its prey. It was more like that the beast struck the bullet itself than the other way around. Even though the beast was shot, the shockwave of the bullet could still wound Nightingale. But she had prepared for this. The moment the bullet left the muzzle, Nightingale re-entered the mist and stepped onto a fast receding borderline that represented the contour of the earth. This was perfect timing. An outsider might think she leaped backward all of a sudden for a few meters, but in fact, it was the ground underneath that was moving backward. Bang! The bullet smashed into the sickle monster's pointy head and blew it up. Its shell and brain splashed like a blooming flower. The magic glow dissipated quickly and its invisible body twitched and reappeared. The lifeless beast fell to the subterranean lake like a stone dropping into the water. Yet in Nightingale's eyes, the dead body moved headlong upward, as if it were sucked down to the bottom of the surging lake. Taking advantage of the changeable lines in the mist in this way, Nightingale chased and fought against her enemies. Even though the beasts moved very fast, they succumbed to the negative impact of the gravity. When Nightingale lured them into the battlefield on which they had had a fight earlier, they had to slow down to make sure their legs were deeply rooted in the rock, as the previous battle, which had left hundreds of holes in the rocky walls, greatly reduced the friction between their legs and the surface. But her tactics were not flawless. Because she had to step out of the mist and expose herself temporarily to fire at the enemy, she had drawn increasing numbers of beasts to her. What was worse, she had become more vulnerable to the flying demonic beasts because those deformed winged monsters had started to hover in the air close to the dome to bide their time, rather than swoop down blindly as they did before. When she fired at the enemies, those flying beasts would dodge the bullet so that she had to hide in the mist again to relocate her target. Sometimes she had to relay on the borderline in the mist to dodge the massive attacks from the enemies. Nightingale got injured in less than 7 minutes after the battle began. After all, she could not find a good hiding spot in the mist every time after she fired. The change of the lines in the mist was not subject to her will, so the misty world was as perilous to her as to everybody else. A battle of such high intensity was a challenge both to her physical strength and her mentality. The greatest injury was to her ribs. She had failed to dodge a strike when being besieged by 2 flying beasts. Their razor-sharp claws had torn her coat, leaving a deep cut from her flank to her waist. The coated protective suit made by Soraya had saved her from being gutted, but the coating could not block the power of the strike. The pain almost took away her breath, and she had to rest for a long time to recover herself. Evidently, it was multi-eyed demon that manipulated the frantic demonic hybrid beasts, for those hybrid beasts, which were usually prone to fight against each other, actually worked together and launched fierce and continuous attacks this time. That made Nightingale even more determined to destroy the demon. She did not understand why it would rather hide in this great snow mountain than attack Neverwinter. But the demonic beasts with a commander would be a great threat to Prince Roland. Her 10 bullets had all been used up, and there were still 4 sickle monsters left. 10 of the beasts had been killed directly by the bullets, and 2 fell into the lake during the battle. Judging from the turbulent currents of the lake, Nightingale believed that the 2 beasts barely got a chance to survive and come back to the battle. The violent attack from the demonic beasts left Nightingale no time to reload the bullets, and neither did she intend to. She tucked the pistol back to her belt and leaped over an invisible beast and reached its back when a swarm of demonic hybrid beasts came to her. She then pulled the invisible beast into the misty world. The beast got shocked as his vision changed from the battlefield to the world of black and white. Nightingale's magic power streamed from her fingertips. The following beasts that clashed with the first one were all pulled into the mist subsequently. As the number of the beasts entering the mist increased, her magic power exceeded the consumption limit and began to drain. Just at that moment, one of the lines constituting the dome, the misty world, curled up and went flying toward her. This was the moment she had been waiting for. As more beasts had been pulled into the misty world, her magic power quickly drained and the misty world became unstabilized. The twisting lines had thus become a lethal weapon, although at other times they helped her leap a few meters away. The white line swept over the beasts, and their figures suddenly froze. It was like those beasts had vanished instantly, and in a split second, a blank space emerged in the sky of the misty world. But when the beasts reappeared, the weirdest thing happened. The lower parts of their bodies remained in the place where they had disappeared, while the upper parts several meters away, as if a sharp longsword had cut all of them into halves with one swing, and the body parts had been transported and floated in the air. The bodies suspended for a few seconds before they hailed down into the lake, creating numerous water columns. Chapter 8:13 Monster. Suddenly, Nightingale's view was no longer obscured. Seeing this shocking event unfold, the demonic beasts slowed down, and instead of crazily trying to surround her, they refused to move forward as if they were scared of her. These demonic hybrids were scared. The monster hanging on top of the cave waved its tentacles and roared furiously, but it didn't achieve the desired effect. The only ones who still followed its orders were 3 sickle monsters. They were now powerless and could no longer threaten Nightingale. The tight line of defense had now been broken. No enemy could now stop her. Nightingale gathered what was left of her magic power and rushed towards the dome center. As she was closing in, she finally understood what Fran meant by abnormal. The opponent was not so much a creature as it was a pile of exposed organs. It had neither epidermis nor muscular tissue, while vascular intestines, tentacles, and organs that couldn't even be named were all stacked up, looking both unstable and horrible. Obviously, throwing explosives into the monster's mouth was not possible. Nightingale turned her gaze to a pack of vibrating meatballs. Although she was not certain whether it was a vital organ of the monster or not, it was at least placed much deeper and had flowing magic light inside. She guessed that the explosion of the explosives would inevitably cause more damage there. It was a risky plan, but she only had one chance. This fight required one fatal blow. The more she was closing in, the more she could feel its size. Those complex intestines were as thick as a house, while the rest of the stacked-up organs looked like a castle. The only difference was that this castle was alive. Seeing that the sickle monsters could not stop her, the monster started moving. It shot several slender tentacles from within its body, trying to stop Nightingale. Some of the tentacles were like steel whips, which could easily break the rocks in the mountain, but were not very difficult to deal with. As long as she observed the silhouette of these tentacles in advance, she could use the empty spaces between them to avoid them. It was similar to penetrating a wall. A few tentacles that contained magic power and could use different abilities were a different problem altogether. Those colorful magical beams were particularly striking in the black and white world, and Nightingale definitely did not want to experience what was like to get hit by them, so she used flash to avoid them. This, in turn, would greatly increase the consumption of her magic power. Thankfully, the distance between the monster and her was not huge. Only a few moments had passed before she stepped on the monster's huge body, who roared furiously, but in fear of hurting itself, stopped attacking recklessly with its tentacles. Nightingale instantly felt very relieved. She didn't hesitate to open her backpack, took out a pack of explosives, and rushed straight towards the meatballs. She pulled off her next moves instantaneously. She pulled the fuse, stuffed the green smoked explosive and the backpack into the meatballs, and then returned to the misty world, hanging upside down. Then, she pushed with both of her feet and lunged towards the underground lake like an arrow. The monster also noticed her movements, but it did not seem to understand why the enemy would try so hard to get near just to leave a moment later without doing anything. As for the bag, in the monster's eyes, there was no threat at all. For a moment, it even forgot to move its tentacles to chase after the witch who was quickly falling. The most dangerous place in the misty world was in midair. She would break into pieces if she hit some airflow silhouettes when she was falling, and so she stopped exerting her ability and waved goodbye to the monster. Curiously, at that moment, she thought of Roland. Whenever they were testing gunpowder, he would always turn his back to the testing ground and say that real warriors never looked at an explosion. Even though both Agatha and her would roll their eyes at him, he didn't mind, as if he had just completed a ritual that only he knew about. Thinking about that, Nightingale can't help but smile. But right now, she didn't want to imitate him. It was not about being a real warrior or not. She simply wanted to watch the monster explode into pieces. Just as soon as the sound between the lake and the underground river meeting each other could be heard, a red light suddenly lit up the ceiling of the dark cave. In a place where there was never daylight, a ray of light seemed as bright as the dawn. The darkness quickly faded, leaving behind the long shadows, and for the first time, bright waves appeared on the lake's surface. What followed was a thunderous roar. Suddenly, the whole cave shook. Nightingale clearly saw, among the dazzling fireworks, the body of the monster convulsing fiercely, as if it was suffering greatly. Half of the bloody moon covering the dome suddenly disappeared, and some of the organs were shot out like volcanic eruptions. As for the area close to the explosion, it was instantly set on fire, generating a thick, dark smoke. Splash! She crashed into the water. The world momentarily became quiet, leaving only the sound of her beating heart. The fast spinning of the water formed a bottomless black hole under her body, and it seemed like it wanted to drag her into the abyss. In the face of such force, any struggle would be meaningless. But, thankfully, Nightingale was prepared. She released what little of her magic power that was left to summon the mist and used the spiraling white lines to climb to the surface as if climbing the stairs. At this point, the magic power in her body had been completely depleted, and the after effects of overuse began to appear. Her brain was attacked by intense pain and dizziness, her limbs could not stop trembling, and she could hardly control her body anymore. As she struggled to get to the lakeshore, Nightingale knew she was running out of strength. Before losing consciousness, she saw a worm breaking through the wall and a golden figure flying towards her in a hurry. Nightingale. Is she okay? Fran asked anxiously. It's nothing serious, she just exhausted her magic power. Agatha briefly examined Nightingale and then handed her to the god's punishment, which, you carry her. We must leave this place at once. When Nightingale left, everyone decided that no matter what, they would go to meet her after the explosion, and decided to let Fran eat all their remaining food. Even though it was not certain she could find a way out, she could still crawl with them to the campsite. But they did not expect the explosion to be so effective. It not only stopped the worm carrier inside the walls, but it also made the rest of the demonic beasts flee the area. Leave her to me, Elena personally took Nightingale. After witnessing the battle, the tequila survivors became more respectful toward the blonde witch. Don't we need to finish it off? Lightning looked at the struggling monster, as if not satisfied. It doesn't seem to be dead. Dying beasts are the most dangerous, and you can only bring one pack of explosives at most, so it's better not take this risk, Agatha said with a deep voice. By the time the first army has been assembled, it'll be dead sooner or later. Fine, the little girl hesitated before nodding. Just when everyone was ready to leave, the monster suddenly issued a cry. Following the dull and muddy sound, the lake suddenly changed. Under the sparkling flames, a huge skeleton came out of the water and opened a row of ribbed claws towards the top of the cave. Even in such a fast current of water, it remained steady. The monster loosened its tentacles that were climbing to the top of the cave and fell into the skeleton. The sinking skeleton suddenly stirred up layers of waves, making the lake water push toward the shore. Even the surging underground river flowed backwards for a time. The ribs began to close, as if wrapping up the monster into a package, and then slowly sunk back into the lake. The instant it came into contact with the water, the burning flames on the monster turned into white smoke and emitted a pungent odor. Right before the monster vanished, everyone saw its densely packed eyes. Although half of them were gone, the rest of the eyes expressed a strong sense of hatred toward them. Moments later, the swirling lake engulfed the monster as if it had never appeared. Chapter 8:14, Impartial Person. The demonic beasts have fled. They all fled. Cheers were heard across the battlefield. The demonic beasts that were previously gathered at the entrance of the cave had all fled away, leaving several corpses behind them. The machine gunner released the trigger only to find out that his finger joint had gone numb. Because there was no time to change the gun barrel, it had turned red, which, according to the shooting regulations, meant that it was scrapped. Their numbers were intimidating, but once we start fighting them, they didn't look so scary. The Church's God's Punishment Army was much more fierce. They are only beasts after all. Beasts? Why are you talking nonsense? Go fight them with a bow if you dare. 3 years ago, these things were terrorizing the western region. Everything changed because of His Majesty, do you understand? Yes, Captain. Instead of celebrating, change the gun barrel. Edith was standing in the back of the battlefield. She had a thoughtful look while watching the busy yet orderly First Army. After following Roland's army to participate in the tooth extraction campaign and the Church's destruction, she always tried to imagine how would she command the army in order to achieve the maximum effectiveness of the firearms. Without a doubt, this was a completely new kind of army, and so the combat strategy was different from that of the knightages and the mercenaries from before. It was not easy to forget her previous successful experience of fighting through charging, relying on excellent weapons, and personal bravery. But when she realized that knights could no longer compete against the new army, she promptly discarded all of her previous experience and started watching all of His Majesty's actions closely. Through today's battle, she was able to verify that her thinking was basically correct. The most notable feature of the firearms was their ability to kill opponents with extreme efficiency before they could get closer without regard to the spacing between soldiers and their physical condition. Therefore, the narrower the shooting area, the more intense the firepower would be. As long as the ammunition supply did not stop, they could fire from morning to night. 2 platoons of soldiers could be arranged in a battlefield where previously only 3 to 4 knights would be able to charge from. They could only arrange 3 machine guns, not because more could not fit but due to limited ammunition. But even so, their fierce firepower still made it hard for the demonic hybrids to advance. They did not even get tired or need to aim. They just had to pull the trigger. Whenever the opponents were too close together, she would even see a thick blood-red mist arising in the entrance. If His Majesty was in command, he wouldn't have done anything different. The only thing she did not understand was the behavior of the demonic beasts. Obviously, some of them had basic intelligence. When it got difficult to attack the cave entrance, many of the demonic hybrids began to wander outside the cave, occasionally howling, but still not advancing, as if they were encouraging the other demonic beasts to sacrifice themselves. But since they had the ability to think, why did they still obey the weird commanding voices? The demonic beasts apparently did not need a relationship between lords and subjects, which was about mutual support and protection. As long as they escaped into the barbarian land, they could totally survive alone, unlike humans who had to be part of a group in order to survive. Could it be that there was an inexplicable connection between the demonic beasts and the owner of that voice whose importance was above the beast's own survival? It was hard for her to imagine that. She thought she should ask His Majesty Roland after the search was completed. Currently, the only thing in Neverwinter that she found surprising and hard to figure out was His Majesty's thoughts. Whenever they were talking, she would always ponder over the same question: how vast could the human mind be? "Miss Edith, you were very helpful this battle," Brian's voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned around and saw the young officer's face full of gratitude. "I'll definitely mention your contribution to His Majesty in the battle report." "I only did my job," Edith smiled. "I wasn't sure it would be successful at that time, so you don't need to mention my suggestion in the report." "Unacceptable." Brian shook his head again and again. "His Majesty said that in the army, the result and not the process is the only thing that matters. A victory is a victory. If I don't mention your contribution, then I'm no different than a thief. Plus, it's also unfair to you." "Fine." The Pearl of the Northern Region shrugged. "If you insist." "Of course." At this point, he paused and then made a military salute. "Furthermore, I now understand more what you said before about trust. The First Army thanks you for your advice. I'll leave now as I also have many things to attend to." Looking at the captain leaving, Edith suddenly understood why His Majesty chose a patrol captain of the border to serve as an important military officer. Battle achievements were the basis for the knights when requesting a reward from the Lord, and the last thing they would want was to share with others. There were countless cases that involved faking and lying, and not even her trustees could resolve them. In general, though the First Army was different in many aspects, promotions and rewards were still linked to battle achievements. She was not a member of the army, so even if the other party had completely concealed this matter, she wouldn't have personally argued her case to His Majesty. To be able to calmly share with others whatever benefits he had gained just to be fair, in fact, compared to other knights, this former patrol captain was actually much more of a knight. Loyal to his king and honest, this was probably why Roland entrusted him with such an important task. Commanding and knowledge could both be learned, but a person's character was hard to change. Edith had noticed very early on that the spirit and manner of His Majesty's First Army were completely different from those of the knights. It was something new completely. Probably the key to creating such an army was abandoning the nobles' power and selecting only civilians to enlist, coupled with the ideological education in the primary textbooks. And now, she had also left her name in the army. Half a day later, Roland received intelligence that the situation had been resolved. At this point, the 100 emergency reinforcements had already embarked on the boat, while the rest of the reinforcements were also preparing their belongings, waiting for the dispatching order. Even the newcomers of the Witch Union, Annie, Broken Sword and the rest were prepared to go support them. From the city hall to the First Army, the whole of Neverwinter was nervous, as if the city had been attacked by demonic beasts, but in the end, it all proved to be just a false alarm. The messenger was, once again, Maggie. Looking at her tilted head and slightly opened mouth, Roland did not know whether to laugh or cry. He took out some beef from the drawer and threw it on the table. She immediately picked it up happily. However, taking morale into account, he eventually did not order the first platoon to return, but instead replaced Annie's team with Soraya and Summer in order to conduct a more comprehensive exploration of the ruins. Chapter 8:15, Discoveries and Decisions. In the next 3 days, the reports and messages about the exploration in the Great Snow Mountain had been sent back to Neverwinter one after another. Roland had felt his heart skipping a beat the moment he had heard that Nightingale had exhausted her magic power and passed out during a fight. Fortunately, she had been all right when this news had arrived. In order to reassure His Majesty, she had also asked Maggie to let Roland know that she was all right. The exploration results showed that inside the Great Snow Mountain there was indeed a city in ruins, which was left by the underground civilization. However, as compared to the maze inside the impassable mountain range, this city was not that well preserved. Most caves in the newly discovered ruins had collapsed long before, and several intact compartments were just filled with spoiled food, bug eggs and corpses. Near the underground lake, a broken magic core was found by the Tequila Witches. According to the scouting team's reports, they found no documented records there, and the best part of their journey was the discovery of an original carrier and 2 devouring worms inside the mountain. he was surprised by the results. If this monster with many eyes was just a dumb beast who happened to settle down in the ruins, he would never find its destructive behavior strange. However, it was obviously not just a stupid animal. He still remembered that something in this great snow mountain had sent devouring worms to swallow Agatha's laboratory and the Blackstone Pagoda in the Devil's Town. These actions were clearly not just for food. In this exploration inside the mountain, the team had also spotted both human beings and demons trapped in the strange bug eggs. These facts made him believe that the unknown enemy must have been trying to collect information about the other two species it was going to fight against in the battle of divine will. When he received the first batch of bug egg corpses, he noticed that their decomposed skin was apparently not caused by corrosion but corpse wax formed by long-term storage. That meant these corpses had been kept in the egg for a very long time and were apparently not stored as food. Only an intelligent individual would make other creatures into specimens. In that case, he really did not understand why the monster had destroyed this underground city. He wondered whether it was because that the monster did not care about the things treasured by tequila witches. He scanned through Soraya's pictures of the scenes inside the mountain and became lost in thought. He found that the moment before the monster sank into the water, its remaining hundreds of eyes seemed to be filled with resentment. He did not know whether this was a false impression or not. He felt its eyes became different when it was severely wounded. In the beginning, those eyes appearing on the cave roof were simply gazing at the witches, but after they hurt it badly, its eyes showed an obvious emotional expression. When he put those two pictures together to compare, he felt as if the monsters in those two pictures were not the same one. As for the underground lake in the bottom of the ruins, where the monster sank in, Sylvie confirmed that it was connected to a water vein leading to the swirling sea. On his current technical level, he was not able to track the enemy once it entered the swirling sea, and let this monster successfully get away. What he could do next was to block the water vein by collapsing the dome of the ruins with powerful explosives. By doing so, he could ensure the safety of Neverwinter. The exploration team had also sent him good news. In Lightning's reports, he read about some bugs. They looked the same as the egg bugs, but had once gushed out very sticky jelly to tightly trap Fran. The mucus they spat out was able to become a consolidated, sticky thing like spider silk in certain circumstances. These bugs were neither intelligent nor aggressive. According to Agatha's studies, they were not from the fertile plains. In other words, these bugs were probably brought here by the monster. However, what intrigued Roland most was not the origin of these bugs but the fact that their mucus could solidify quickly. According to Lightning's description, these bugs could be bred in captivity. Therefore, in his reply, he asked Agatha to make a detailed report on the living and eating habits of these bugs and to investigate what kind of harm they might cause. He also required the team to collect the strange plants and fungi in the ruins. He was particularly interested in the fruits which gave out dim, cold light in the dark and the giant mushroom as big as an adult. When he was about to review the wonderful pictures of the underground caves, someone knocked on his door. Phyllis walked into his office. She bowed and said, "Your Majesty, Lady Pasha would like to talk to you about the ruins." He immediately nodded to agree. He had sent all the exploration reports of these days to the tequila survivors and he also really wanted to hear the ancient witch's views of the monster. "Good, let's hold a video meeting." "By what?" Phyllis was stunned and took a few seconds to realize what it was. "You mean a meeting through the phantom instrument?" "Yes, in the usual place at the reception hall on the first floor." He could not help but grin as he was so happy to finally find someone who could understand his nonsense. "I got it." She laughed and said, "I'm going to inform Pasha." When he walked to the reception hall, Faldi and all the other God's punishment witches all rose and bowed to him with both hands on the chest as if they were saluting a higher ascendant. They looked solemn, and were completely different from the they looked in the dream world. Since he had taken them into his dreamland, he was now venerated as someone similar to the three chiefs of the Union. He could tell from their etiquette and attitude toward him that now they did not consider him as a common man anymore, though they still used the phrase common people to describe his subjects. Though they had agreed not to care too much about etiquette as he had required, they still saluted him more formally than his own guards. Seeing this, he had no choice but to let them do whatever they wanted. Inside the hall, he saw Pasha through the light curtain waiting for him. "First of all, I have to express my sincere gratitude to you," she said while bending her main tentacle. "Your help is of great importance to Tequila in exploring the ruins and in restoring the god's punishment witch's lost feelings. I'm helping myself by helping you since we'll be fighting together in the upcoming battle of divine will," he replied with a smile. "Well, what are you going to do with the newly discovered shells in the ruins? There are only two ways to deal with them. Moving them here or moving the soul instrument to where they're located." She paused to think for a minute and continued. "I prefer the second method. When the magic core was turned off, it would look like some dry skeleton. He could use a concrete boat to carry it, but he was afraid that he could not transport shells, even empty ones, in this way. The big blob and worms were too scary for the common people. He was clear that the universal education of Neverwinter had not yet prepared them to accept these dreadful shells that looked like monsters from hell." Roland agreed with Pasha's suggestion of the second method, though the transportation of the instruments still posed a problem. "So have you picked out the witches who were willing to accept the soul transfer?" Half a month ago, Tequila survivors had been eager to search for ruins left by the underground civilization in the Great Snow Mountain, since they had earnestly hoped to find new shells in the ruins. Most of the god's punishment witches at that time had longed to merge with them to regain their long-lost feelings, such as touch, taste and smell, even though they had known that by doing so, they would look like monsters and would never change back into human forms. However, now the situation was different, as they had another choice. Chapter 8:16, Deep-Sea Demons. Now everyone in the third border city knew that a god's punishment which could regain her appearance and feelings when she entered the dream world by cutting off her consciousness. Roland had repeatedly heard Phyllis describe their enthusiasm for the dream world. According to her, every time she got back to the underground, they would follow her and keep asking about her experiences in that world. He wondered whether they would still be eager to merge with shells when they found out this new method to restore their feelings. However, it was not a perfect solution to their problem, as they could only regain their appearance and feelings in their sleep. By contrast, being in shells, they could always have some feelings, and these shells were almost immortal unless they were heavily damaged. It would be difficult to make a choice between these two alternatives. He thought of another possibility for them. If they had kept the news about the dream world a secret, they would have been able to send the instrument and God's punishment witches there to carry out their soul transfer. This way, the volunteers would never be able to go back even if they regretted afterwards. However, he believed that Pasha would not delude her witches into accepting the shells. Based on his observation in the past month, though the Tequila witches had lived in seclusion for hundreds of years, they did not turn into a conservative organization. They were still open to new things and had abolished class inequality in their group. Apparently, the sacrifice of the three chiefs had deeply moved them, and the threat posed by demons had kept them working to make greater progress. Pasha seemed to read his mind. "You don't have to worry about this problem. With more shells, we'll be better equipped to defeat the demons. Original carriers can operate the magic core, and devouring worms can speed up the construction of the defense line. They'll do everything to win the upcoming Battle of Divine Will without hesitation." In fact, the volunteers had decided to go to the Great Snow Mountain together with the instrument. Volunteers aren't afraid of any sacrifice, Roland thought while biting his lips. "It seems that I've worried too much. I'll send ships to transport the instrument for you when the exploration has finished." "Thank you for helping us," she said happily. He nodded and laid Soraya's pictures on the table. "All the information I've sent you before were written materials. I finally received these pictures of the ruins today. I would like to know your thoughts on this monster. Please wait for a moment." She waved her tentacles to summon Celine and Alethea, who had been repairing the instrument of divine retribution. 3 blobs came to the light curtain to study the pictures together. With their tentacles connected, they remained silent for an unexpectedly long time, and communicated through their minds. As they were not able to show any expression on the outside, he felt as if this video call had already disconnected. After a long time, he finally heard Pasha in his head again. Sorry to have kept you waiting. We're shocked by some pictures, so we have to discuss them thoroughly. It's neither a demonic beast nor a demon, right? Yes, said Celine, and the skeleton that fell into the water has appeared in Lady Natalia's description about the divine land. Are you sure? Yes. We've stayed underground for hundreds of years, but we would never be so foolish as to forget such an important piece of information. In fact, carriers have a much better memory than human beings, said Alethea, grumpily. Lady Natalia saw the sea and skeletons in the third painting scroll. This thing in the pictures matches her description. More importantly, this lake is connected to the sea. We can be sure it's the thing mentioned by Lady Natalia. So, now we can say it's from the unknown civilization? He asked while touching his chin. He was not surprised at their conclusion. When he had found the devouring worm also swallowing things in the Devil's Town, he had suspected that it must have been sent by some neutral party who had decided not to help anyone in the battle of divine will. Alternatively, it could also have been the unknown enemy in the upcoming battle. He had made up this exploration plan not only to help the tequila survivors but also to eliminate hidden threats for Neverwinter and spy on the unknown enemy. He had read a similar description in Zero's memory fragment, but it was vague. Now, as the tequila witches also thought the monster belonged to the unknown enemy, he could confirm that suspicion. It's highly possible, but, Pasha hesitated for a while and continued. There are still many things we don't understand, such as the demonic beasts. These beasts across the land of dawn are mutated animals. They should have been affected by the erosion of magic power, just like witches. But why did they follow this monster's orders? It's different from the demons who enslave the demonic hybrids. The beasts seem to willingly obey this monster's orders. Roland had also pondered over this question. He thought that if the unknown enemy were intelligent creatures who had demonic beasts as part of their civilization, they would have accumulated these hybrids first and then used them to eliminate both human beings and demons. He could not understand why the unknown civilization wasted these beasts in the months of demons every year. Maybe the origin of those mutated beasts might not be as simple as they had believed. We'll know the answer when the Battle of Divine Will starts. He shrugged his shoulders, pretending to be relaxed. They'd better be the monster's relatives. In that case, we'll never see these ugly beasts on the snowy plains after we have defeated all our enemies in the battle. Pasha was stunned and then started to chuckle. Yes, you're right indeed. No matter where they come from, we'll still have to defeat them in the Battle of Divine Will. After that, they discussed the defense line construction project and the method to block the underground river in the newly discovered ruins. When the meeting was about to finish, Roland suddenly raised a question. Yeah, as we've caught some clues left by the hidden civilization now, we have to give it a name, don't we? He cleared his throat. Just like what we did with the first painting scroll. We call the guys in it demons. Is this important? Pasha tilted her main tentacle. Demons is just their most widely known name. They were also called blood beasts, the deformity, or polluters back in the Union. Of course, a proper name is very important for propaganda and motivational campaigns. We should make it sound as evil as possible so as to arouse the people's indignation. So, do you have any idea? Well, since these hidden enemies stay in the sea for most of the time, shall we call them sea monsters? All the people in the meeting fell silent. Isn't that good? I thought the name, the Third Border City, was bad enough. I never expected you to make up something even worse, Alethea mocked. Sea monster? It sounds like a giant octopus. Alethea. Pasha moved her main tentacle to give Alethea a knock on the head. Your Majesty, if you think it's all right. I think, we don't have a problem with it. The ancient witch agreed on the name, but reluctantly. Roland picked up his cup to sip some tea whilst trying to conceal his embarrassment. Ahem. Scroll, who was by his side and taking notes for this meeting, coughed suddenly. Your Majesty, how about calling them deep-sea demons? Deep-sea demons? He repeated. Yes, since the concept of demons has been deeply rooted in the hearts of the people, they'll understand what this new name refers to without us clarifying. This way, we don't need much efforts to describe the unknown civilization for the people. It's better for the city hall to carry out the propaganda campaigns, and the people won't feel that we've got to fight many enemies at the same time, explained Scroll, with a quill in his hand. Though he was unwilling to accept the fact that someone else came up with a better name, he still twitched his mouth and said, "It seems to be a little better. Let's use this name." Now the civilization depicted in the second painting scroll got a formal name. Chapter 8:17, Meeting Ashes Again. Lorgar slowed down when she saw the first forest in her journey. For the first time ever, she set foot in the domain of a northern kingdom. She had heard many people describing the evergreen woodlands, flourishing grasslands, and steadily flowing water in this place. According to them, one would feel how soft and moist the soil was by simply inserting a hand in it, and would never have to worry about being bitten by some hidden sandworm when fetching water. The north was said to be a place full of life and vitality, like the southernmost region in the past. However, she did not feel the same way about this place. She thought perhaps it was still the months of demons, so this domain did not look any greener the Iron Sand City's big oasis. The trees here had nothing but stark branches, and the ground was covered by withered weeds. Only the dark brown soil under her feet reminded her that this place was not a desert. She looked around and quickly found a place of shelter from the wind. In this shelter, she transformed back into a girl and put on her clothes. After that, she continued to track the caravans by following their smell that was left in the air. That was how she traveled these days. When night fell, she would transform into a wolf and run toward the north. She lived on sandworms and giant scorpions and had even attracted some desert wolves along the way. In the daytime, she would walk on the Silver Stream trade route in her human form. This way, she could get her water bag refilled when she ran into some merchants there. Her journey was not smooth sailing all the time. Princess Lorgar of the Wild Flame clan was always generous, thus she would attract some people who were coveting her bag of gold royals. But she had vigilant ears that were erected on her head, so she was always able to know the merchants' ulterior motives in advance. At the very beginning of her journey, she had made all the vicious guys pay a bitter price, but now she decided just to follow those caravans from a distance and used the smell they left to confirm their direction. Half a day later, she heard the sound of sea waves. As this new harbor town built by the Northern Kingdom did not have thick city walls, she could see everything clearly by standing on a high slope. Tents stood along the river. Many people gathered near the sea and seemed to be busy with constructing some square, flat buildings. What she found most surprising about this bustling scene was that most of the workers were northerners. She could only see a small number of Mahjins there. Shortly after stepping onto the territory of Port of Clearwater, she found the First Army's camp. She identified herself to the guards and soon met the black-haired woman again. This woman she had been eagerly looking forward to seeing was Ashes. Before she could think about what to say, Ashes opened her mouth and said calmly, "I knew you'd come." Her golden eyes gave the wolf girl a feeling of familiarity, making her feel as if they had just said goodbye to each other yesterday. Lorgar could not help but shake her ears. "How did you know?" "Because you're just like the old me." Ashes curled her lips into a smile. "In your heart, there's a goal you want to pursue." Her eyes lit up immediately. "You were pursuing combats, too?" "No. I just wanted revenge." The extraordinary shook her head and turned away. "Come with me. Echo will be very happy to see you again." "Revenge?" Lorgar was stunned and thought to herself. After a while, she finally realized that Ashes had just meant that they both had goals but not the same one. The wolf girl caught up with the extraordinary and asked, "Who did you want to get back at?" "Church of Hermes." Ashes shrugged. "At first, I did this just to vent my hatred. As time went by, it became a habit until I met Her Highness Tilly. She made me see that there were more important things in this world than killing all the church people." When Ashes mentioned Her Highness Tilly, the wolf girl perceived a feeling of tenderness in her tone, which was rare for the extraordinary. She guessed this Tilly who was able to change such a determined and strong-willed person must have been very uncommon. She secretly bore this name in her mind. When they passed a flat building under construction, Lorgar raised another question. I heard that the port of Clearwater has become burned ruins ever since the Queen of Clearwater left this area. These people aren't local refugees, are they? Why do they seem to outnumber the Majin immigrants? Of course, they aren't. They all come from Neverwinter. The wolf girl could hardly believe what she had heard. Neverwinter, you mean the domain of King of Grey Castle, Roland Wimbledon? He ordered his own people to build residences for the Majins here? He didn't need to force anyone. All of these people came here voluntarily because the construction project here pays them better. They can get a pay raise of 5 to 10 silver royals by working here. The workers said that soon after the Ministry of Construction issued a recruitment notice for this project, City Hall was packed with applicants. The Ministry of Construction? City Hall? The wolf girl felt lost hearing these strange words. She wagged her tail and asked, what about the Sand Nation? Lorgar remembered the first batch of immigrants consisted of several small clans and were about 2,000 to 3,000 people. She wondered why the great chief still wanted to send his own people traveling all the way from the north to the southernmost region when he had so many Majins to work for him. She started to doubt his true motives. As His Majesty wants to build a new city in Endless Cape, most Majins went there, Ashes answered quickly, so did the people from Osha clan. Only by participating in the construction task could the Majins get new homes and food supply just like the subjects of Neverwinter. Lorgar was surprised to hear that the king planned to build a city in the uninhabited wasteland which had no oasis. If it was not for Ashes, a proud person who was loath to lie, she would never believe this. What's the King of Grey Castle thinking about, she wondered. Then, what about the people who are unable to go there? If they've got to stay due to health problems, they can help the construction team here to build the port of Clearwater. By doing so, they'll get the same treatment. In other words, as long as you're willing to work, you'll never have to worry about going hungry. Ashes sighed with mixed feelings. Her Highness Tilly once said that the ideal world in her mind was a place where you reaped what you sowed and made a fortune by your own hard work instead of exploiting the others. It sounded incredible, but her useless brother did make it happen. Lorgar automatically ignored the last comment made by Ashes. But, why does the great chief want to build a city in Endless Cape? That place has nothing. There's Blackwater. His Majesty wants to collect as much of it as possible, Ashes said while spreading out her palms. That's the reason? The wolf girl was stunned, rooted to the ground. He did so much work just to collect Blackwater? He can simply buy it from the Iron Sand City, just like the Queen of Clearwater used to do. Lorgar did not believe in goodwill for no apparent reason. Most dominators just wanted wealth and lands, but the king apparently was acting contrary to this principle. He gave the land to the Sand Nation and spent a lot to reclaim the desert and to station troops in this place. She believed that the money he spent on these things was enough to buy hundreds of barrels of Blackwater. If what Ashes said was true, then the king's deeds were really strange, she thought, and then started to worry about her father's decision. She expected Ashes to refute or explain further, but the extraordinary just raised her brow and said, yes, that's true. Who knows what the hell he's thinking? What? Ashes said casually, even in Neverwinter, there are only a few who can understand his absurd theories. Andrea may be able to know what he's thinking. After all, they're both nobles, and their friendship is one mind in two bodies. The others probably won't be able to explain this to you. Anyway, who cares? I'm not here for him. As long as Lady Tilly thinks it's a good idea, I'll be fine with it. She stopped walking after saying these words, and then said, here we are. Chapter 818, The Neverwinter Power Rankings. Just like Ashes had said, Drow Silvermoon was overjoyed at Lorgar's arrival. The Osha princess immediately gave her a warm hug. The wolf girl was surprised and did not know where to put her raised hand. Usually a chief of a clan only greeted another chief with a hug. Lorgar had intended to greet the new chief of Osha clan by bowing to her with a hand on the chest, though Silvermoon was 1 or 2 years younger than her. During their conversation, the chief did not put on an air of superiority. When she heard that Lorgar was planning to go to Neverwinter with them, she immediately regarded her as a sister. She asked the wolf girl to call her Echo and happily introduced her to the new life of the witches in Neverwinter. Lorgar did not believe everything that Echo had said. According to what she knew, no matter how abundant Greycastle's resources was, it could never eliminate hunger. She guessed the chief might be exaggerating by describing the place as a kingdom of God, where no one worried about hunger and illness which could be cured by witches. Though this was the first time she left the desert, she had heard many tales about the northern kingdoms. She knew the kingdoms were just like the Iron Sand City, where only a small group of people in high places could lead a luxurious life. She believed that as a divine lady who was no longer an heiress to the Wild Flame clan, she would never be as lucky as the Osha princess who had gained the king's appreciation. But this was not a problem for Lorgar. She just wanted to improve herself by fighting all those strong opponents in Neverwinter. When she told them that her clan also considered moving to Port of Clearwater, they did not appear pleasantly surprised as she had expected. Iron Axe, Osha's faithful dog, even knitted his eyebrows. Only Echo smiled and asked, "Really?" The Osha princess seemed excited and continued to say, "Great. As soon as the Wild Flame clan comes here, it won't be long before Port of Clearwater restores its prosperity of the past. His Majesty's goal can be achieved earlier." Ahem. Lady Echo. Iron Axe-eyed Echo. It's just their plan, and it won't necessarily come true. Ah, yes, I was too impatient. Echo smiled, slightly embarrassed. Lorgar immediately understood the reason for their cold response. As the former strongest clan, Wild Flame had more than 5,000 people in total, significantly outnumbering all the Majin immigrants here. More importantly, she believed that the Northerners must have found that these small clans who were competing with each other were much easier to control as compared to some powerful big clan. She thought that they probably never expected that a clan in the Iron Sand City would decide that quickly to move here, since the 6 big clans in the city did not have to worry that their oasis would dry up. These big clans were considered to be the most reluctant ones to leave the city, and most people even believed that they would never turn to the King of Greycastle. She did not continue talking about this matter, for she knew that the Wild Flame clan moving here would increase the Northerners' influence and at the same time change the balance of powers in this area. She had to admit that it was not a bad thing if the Osha clan or the king failed to control the situation at that time and let her father grasp the power. After all, she was still Prince Lorgar of the Wild Flame clan. In the next few days, Lorgar would walk along Clearwater Bay whenever she got a chance. As she had met Ashes here, she was not that eager to leave for Neverwinter. She decided to use this period of time to examine carefully this evergreen land where Wild Flame decided to settle down. She soon discovered that the construction speed of Greycastle's workers was way beyond her imagination. On the bank of the river, they built a row of hemispherical furnaces which could produce a new batch of bricks each day with a mixture of earth and river sand. And these furnaces did not burn wood but some gray-black stones shipped from the northwest. They only needed to be filled with these stones once in a day, since these stones could keep burning all day long, which seemed much better than charcoals. Brick production was the part where more Majins, mostly women and seniors, were involved. They were divided into several groups, digging earth or carrying black stones. For each basket a worker dug out or carried, the supervisor would press a mark on his or her arm. According to the wolf girl's observation, the marks determined how much food a worker could get each day. As for the construction work, she seldom saw Majins engage in it. The Northerners did everything. They mixed the water with some gray powder to make paste and used it when they stacked bricks. Each house was built with the same size, style, and method. She could notice new changes in these buildings almost every day. Another thing that greatly surprised her was how differently the Majins and the people from Greycastle reacted when they saw her half-animal looks. Since leaving the Iron Sand City, she no longer covered her fluffy tail and ears. Most Majins would avoid her eyes when they saw her and try to back away from her, even though they had the same skin color. She was no stranger to this kind of reactions and was prepared for this. Whereas the people from Grey Castle did not show even the slightest bit of fear or hatred in front of her. Some braver ones even took the initiative to say hello to her and seemed to be used to this kind of looks. She was baffled by their behavior and asked Ashes about this. "Ah, you mean this? Isn't it a usual thing for the witches?" the extraordinary said while spreading out her palms. "Half human and half beast isn't a rare thing. Someone can even totally transform into a beast." She continued to explain, "For example, there's a witch named Maggie. She looks much more scary than you after transformation. However, after she acted as a rescuer several times, everyone got used to her looks. Even if you don't look human, they won't ostracize you." Lorgar wiggled her wolf ears and thought, Is that true? In that case, my determination to embrace my defects and accept my true self was not necessary at all?" She suddenly thought of another question. "Ah, are you the strongest witch in Neverwinter?" Well, the wolf girl did not know whether it was an illusion, but she did feel that Ashes looked more serious now. "That depends on the types of my opponents. One type of witches can wear God's Stone of Retaliation. The other type of witches usually don't wear them. They're not able to use their abilities wearing God's stones, are they?" "Yes. Without God's stone, I'm not sure I can defeat some witches in the Witch Union." "Even you can't defeat them?" Lorgar was shocked. Ashes nodded. "I believe I could before they evolved, but their improved abilities were beyond common sense. They're not something you can fight with using just speed and strength. For example, there's a witch called Leaf. When you fight with her within the area controlled by her Heart of Forest, she'll become as powerful as the deities. It'll be extremely hard to escape from her trap in the woods, even if you wear God's Stone of Retaliation. If I have to fight against the witches of Neverwinter, she's definitely the last one I want to meet." The wolf girl was thrilled when she heard this. "Who else?" "Anna. Although she's not good at combat, her ability is impeccable. Without God's Stone, I can't imagine how to defeat her. I mean in a duel. But since she's the most important witch in Neverwinter and Roland's sweetheart, you'll never get a chance to fight her." Ashes continued while counting on her fingers. "And Nightingale. If you often challenge the Neverwinter witches, you'll definitely attract her attention. As she's touchy and has a really weird ability, you'd better avoid fighting her." Lorgar wagged her tail, imprinting the names on her memory one by one. "So, what about Maggie? You said she could transform into a big beast?" "Yes, she'll make a well-matched rival for you in a duel, but I'd advise you not to do so." Ashes seemed to think of something and smiled meaningfully. "That's because all the people who challenged her could not get rid of bad luck, and if you accidentally hurt her, you'd incur the wrath of the entire Witch Union." Chapter 819, A Graceful Lady. Lorgar nodded to Ashes as she considered Maggie as one of the top dogs in the Witch Union. In her mind, the witch was still an ugly, cruel, but very formidable beast. So, what about the witches wearing God's Stones of Retaliation? The wolf girl knew that once her opponent used God's stones, her ability would be significantly limited. Under such circumstances, she would not be able to freely transform all her body parts. If this opponent were just another warrior from the desert, it would be fine. However, if they were an extraordinary like Ashes, it would be impossible for her to come out on top. Her ability was useless when she was faced with such a strong witch who also wore God's stone. Given this, she had ranked Ashes as the best fighter amongst the witches from Neverwinter. The extraordinary remained silent for a while before replying. "Suppose there's someone whose strength and speed is in no way inferior to those of an extraordinary. At the same time, she's an almost unlimited lifespan and will never be harmed by any injuries. Even if she suffers fatal blows, she'll be able to completely recover, given time. How strong do you think she would be?" Lorgar could not help but gasp in astonishment. Being an experienced warrior herself, she was well aware of the importance of fighting skills and experience. In the holy duels, the toughest opponent to deal with wouldn't be those brave young fighters, but instead, the seasoned warriors who were in their 30s. These veterans were usually the backbone of a clan, and they often served as combat tutors and supervisors for a clan's newer generation. She would never underestimate such warriors who not only matched the younger fighters in strength but were also much more experienced, having gone through numerous life or death situations. However, when warriors turned 40, their body would inevitably become less agile, and the wounds suffered over the years would gradually accumulate and worsen. Even if their skills became more and more refined over time, they would no longer be able to move as fluidly as they once had done. Lorgar wanted to go to Neverwinter to hone her fighting skills was because she knew that there was an overpowered healing witch who could heal all sorts of injuries. Now she was more intrigued by her future trip to the western region, as there was even a witch who was impervious to pain and had an unlimited lifespan. She believed that anyone who lived long enough would be able to become a very accomplished fighter. Even just thinking about going against such a warrior made her scared. No, excited. Is there really such a person in Neverwinter? Lorgar asked excitedly. Yes, there's this witch in the city who's called Phyllis, Ash replied. I've never fought her, but... But what? The extraordinary said slowly. One time when I was practicing with my sword in the castle's garden, she happened to pass by and give me a few suggestions. Later, I tried practicing again while following her pointers and found that my sword strokes did get noticeably smoother. Unfortunately, I left Neverwinter soon after and haven't gotten a chance to ask her for more pointers. Did she really only watch you practice for a short while? Lorgar's tail wagged even faster. Most tutors, even the very experienced ones, had to exchange a few moves with their students to spot the errors in their movements. That was the reason the big clans built their halls of military affairs for their fighters to train in. The more a student matched a tutor in his or her skills, the more difficult it was for the tutor to find faults within the student's techniques. Ashes was undoubtedly an excellent fighter, so the wolf girl believed that the immortal witch, Phyllis, was indeed a mighty warrior for quickly finding Ash's shortcomings just by watching her practice. Lorgar thought that now it seemed like Phyllis was the best fighter in Neverwinter. Since when it came to a real battle, no one could rely solely on the off chance that the opponent was not wearing a god stone of retaliation. She ranked Ashes as the second because she was also immune to the effects of god stones. This powerful extraordinary was the ideal role model that she was chasing after. As for the witch who was blessed with infinite life, the wolf girl believed that it was some miracle created by the three gods and that it was not something that she could ask for. Lorgar couldn't wait to find out how she would fare against these powerful fighters. She was now, even more, looking forward to her journey to the west. Ashes seemed to see through the wolf girl's mind and smiled meaningfully again. Instead of ending their conversation right there, she patted Lorgar's shoulder and slowly said, "By the way, I forget to tell you. There are over 100 witches like Phyllis in Neverwinter." What? Princess Lorgar of the Wild Flame clan was stunned and began to wonder, over 100 witches with infinite life? When did the miracles of the three gods start happening so frequently? Come on. Ashes curled her lips into a smile. You've still got a long way to go. You'll never have to worry about finding a suitable opponent there. Beside Ashes, Lorgar also occasionally ran into another witch, Andrea. She had witnessed this blonde witch's powerful magic longbow on the burning stage. Though she had never fought against her, she thought Ashes was quite right about her. She was a noble just like the king of Grey Castle. They were cut off the same cloth. The wolf girl always felt distanced from Andrea, as if she was living in a different world. Every move Andrea made was so graceful, be it when she was talking to the others or when she was gazing far out to the sea by herself. Watching her, Lorgar began to notice that she had a lot of shortcomings in comparison to Andrea. Princess Lorgar decided to give it a try anyways and said hello to Andrea when nobody was around. The blonde witch greeted her calmly, not showing as much warmth and hospitality as Drow Silvermoon did. However, when she put forward the question that Ashes failed to answer, Andrea suddenly became enthusiastic. The blonde witch said, "As for this question, of course, Ashes wouldn't be able to tell you anything. That muscle-brained witch can barely count to 100, she knows nothing about managing a city. His Majesty Roland's policies are way too complicated. I had to ponder about them over and over before understanding their logic. She paused for a moment and asked, "But are you sure that you really want me to tell you? It's much harder to understand than fighting." "Yes." Lorgar nodded seriously. "My father said that there's a common truth in everything. Learning knowledge in other fields can also promote my fighting skills." "It's obviously nonsense." Andrea rolled her eyes back and slightly sighed. "Fine, I'll tell you. If the king just buys Blackwater with gold royals as you suggested, Neverwinter will have to spend some of its wealth to get what it wants, right?" "All transactions in the world are like that," Lorgar confirmed. "So let's assume that these deals go flawlessly 100% of the time, and 20 years later, the king will see no change in his kingdom, except the loss of a large number of gold royals." "Low loss?" The wolf girl was startled. "Why do you call it a loss? Doesn't his current plan cost him much more?" "Of course not." Andrea put her hair up, bent down, and started drawing on the ground with a stick. "Now that the Majin immigrants in the Southern Territory have been assimilated into Greycastle, any expenses they make will eventually be circulated back into Greycastle's economy. This is because all the things the Majins need to buy come from Neverwinter, therefore, the income they receive will eventually make its way into His Majesty's hands in a process known as the circular flow of income. During this process, the overall amount of wealth circulating in the kingdom will gradually grow and eventually reach an astonishing amount over that 20-year period. To achieve this, His Majesty only needs to invest in this initial stage, but even this initial investment can't be considered a loss as the wealth is circulating through the cities of the kingdom." Chapter 820, The Journey. Lorgar stared at the circles drawn by Andrea on the ground for a good while before she voiced out her thoughts. "But if you want to keep this circulation going, you've got to keep investing money, so, there's still a large amount of wealth that isn't in the hands of the great chief." "That's it. This is what makes His Majesty different from all those other nobles, and it took me a while before I could figure out this point." Andrea then drew a larger circle around the small circles. "From the very beginning, he's regarded the entire Greycastle as his own domain. Given that, no matter which city accumulates the wealth, it still belongs to him. But he's the king, so shouldn't it be natural for him to think that way?" Andrea retorted, "When Wildflame was the strongest clan, were you able to lord over clans in the Silver Stream Oasis? I'm guessing you couldn't even control the other clans inside Iron Sand City. It's the same for the Four Kingdoms. The nobles are like your clan chiefs. They won't let anyone else intervene in the affairs of their land, and neither would they consider any other noble's domain as their homeland." Lorgar remained silent for a while. "We can't control our subjects simply by thinking them ours." "Yes. You're much smarter than Ashes. Stay away from her in the future or your brain will be slowly filled with mud, like hers." Andrea patted Lorgar's shoulder. "The key lies in the combination of military might and the implementation of His Majesty's policies. The former can discourage the nobles from having any second thoughts, while the latter will gradually help to centralize the kingdom's power. This is a brilliant innovation. What's even more amazing is that the king had already put this into practice since the beginning. Only having stayed in Neverwinter for so long can I now recognize the intricacies of this plan. It's indeed a bit complicated." Lorgar scratched her head, and she was a bit surprised. She never expected that this blonde-haired girl who usually distanced herself from the others would answer her questions so enthusiastically and in such great detail. Her guess was that Andrea might have been eagerly looking forward to sharing her findings and thoughts with someone else, but had failed to find a person to talk to. "Of course, politics is 10,000 times more complicated than fighting," said Andrea, proudly, "and that's just one part. The other part is that the king is going to acquire more than just wealth, he'll also have you guys." "Us?" "This principle is much simpler. When Majin immigrants get food and houses through working for the king, they would become part of this circulation. You'll gradually get used to this lifestyle of using your wages to buy all kinds of goods and comforts produced by Greycastle. In the end, you'll never be able to stop living in this kind of a comfortable manner and will eventually become a genuine citizen of the kingdom." Andrea impaled the wooden stick into the ground, wiped her hands clean, and stood up. "This is inevitable. The oases are shrinking, and the survival of the Majin clans are being threatened. Under this circumstance, the king has offered you a way to survive without fighting each other for water, so more and more Majins will choose to leave the desert. Meanwhile, there are many deserted lands lying in the southern territory. It's only natural for the king to bring the Majin people there to reclaim those lands, and create wealth for him. She paused for a moment and asked, "Now do you understand?" By doing so, 20 years later, His Majesty Roland will not only get all the Blackwater that he desires but also an accumulated wealth as well as most of the Majins of the southernmost region. Do you still think that buying Blackwater from the Iron Sand City would be a better option? Lorgar did not answer but instead faintly felt her heart ache. As compared to the answer itself, what shook her more was Andrea's attitude. She believed that Andrea revealed all the reasons behind the king's arrangements, probably not out of trust, but because no Majin could reverse this situation. Lorgar admired this intelligent blonde witch who could actually figure out the king's true intentions. However, she respected the great chief himself even more. He always thought of the bigger picture and was able to become an irreplaceable figure in his subjects' hearts through meticulous planning. Not to mention his revolutionizing ideas. She believed that if he had been born in Iron Sand City, he would have definitely become an outstanding warrior. Perhaps he was the example she should chase after. Thank you for your guidance. I feel my fighting skills have been further enhanced, Lorgar said while making a fist. My pleasure, as long as you can understand. Wait, what? Did you just say fighting skills? Yes. I'll go practice now, so please excuse me, Lorgar said before she turned around without a moment to spare and hurriedly ran for a nearby dune. There just happened to be an open and gravelly ground that was suitable for combat training. So you turned out to be just like Ashes, an idiot. After running for more than 100 steps, the wolf girl still could hear Andrea call her an idiot, but the blonde witch did not sound as cold as she had been before. A week later, Echo informed Lorgar that the Wild Flame clan had officially decided to move to the Southern Territory. As agreed by both parties, this immigration plan would be carried out in 3 phases to reduce Greycastle's burden, and the lands the clan was granted with were the most fertile fields near the estuary in the Old Town, which were located between Clearwater Bay and the port. The whole migration process would last more than a year, and the first batch of immigrants would arrive in several weeks. In order to properly settle the former ruling clan, the Osha princess, who was missing Neverwinter the most, volunteered to extend her stay in the port of Clearwater. Her decision was approved by the king, but Ashes, Andrea, and Hummingbird would still leave as planned, taking the Roland to the western region. As for whether Lorgar would leave with the witches or stay behind to wait for her clan, Echo allowed her to choose for herself. The wolf girl did not think twice before she chose to leave with Ashes. She believed that her father and brother could properly handle interclan affairs without her. The Southern Territory was no longer a place where survival opportunities needed to be won by force and duels. In this place, even small clans could manage to get their stomachs full, not to mention the Wild Flame clan. More importantly, she did not want to cause any misunderstanding by meeting them shortly after she abandoned her right of succession. As she had to leave sooner or later, she decided to leave earlier with the witches. The things about Neverwinter and the Witch Union which she heard from Ashes and Andrea filled her heart with wild expectations. Be it the legendary combat witches, the formidable enemies in the wilderness hiding under the cloak of the red mist, the great chief who did not have enough strength to strangle a chicken, according to Ashes, she looked forward to meeting them all. The next day, Echo sent them on to the steel ship with a smile. Standing on the deck, Lorgar felt that those large concrete boats were nothing as compared to this steady steel ship. The amount of metal used to build the hull for this ship might already exceed that of all the Majin's weapons and armors. With mixed feelings in her heart, she held the railing on the deck and dropped her fluffy ears as she nodded to Echo to say goodbye. With a deep whistle from its horn, the Roland, carrying the witches and Princess Lorgar of the Wild Flame clan, slowly but steadily sailed towards the western region.